All right, let's see how far we can get. This is day 14, trial transcript, Sutherland. Sutherland was the handler for J.R. Olson, I believe. Wednesday, May 30th, 2012, Anchorage, Alaska. Call to order of the dishonorable court, jury not present, all parties present. Please be seated. I've been in connection with anticipated motions here. I started looking at the jury instructions. We've got an awful lot of redrafting to do, and one thing I think you got to separate out overt acts from each count of conspiracy. I don't think you can lump like you did in the anticipated proposed instructions, and that will be a pretty big job. Anyway, where's our witness? There he is. Let's bring the jury in and go to work. The court. Good morning. We shall continue. Miss Lamoureux. Direct examination continued by Miss Lamoureux. Good morning. Good morning. When we left off yesterday, we were listening to clips from your post-arrest interview with Schaefer Cox. Miss Lamoureux, let's go ahead and turn to Exhibit 4110. And again, ladies and gentlemen, let me remind you that this is offered as evidence against Mr. Cox only and should not be considered against the other defendants. Miss Lamoureux, and it should be page 123 of your transcript in the upper right-hand corner. Okay, if we could go ahead and play 4110, please. Audio. Okay. At the beginning of the clip, you ask him a question about Tracy Avenue. Yes, ma'am. What are you referring to there? Some property that he had purchased from James Havens, and he was renting out to a lady, and he had sheds on that property where he still stored some of his personal property. So I was referring to that shed that him and Mr. Barney and Mr. Olson had gone to retrieve personal property and weapons. Is there a road that's adjacent or somehow connected with Tracy to get to that shed, to that property? You can access it several ways. It's generally off Badger Road and then off to the Bradway. So that part of North Pole area. When we hear about Bradway Road and Tracy Road, those are referring to usually the same location. The same shed on that property? Yes, ma'am, they are. You asked some questions about his possession of grenades. I did. And what was his response to you? It was a lengthy back and forth. He had several responses. Several of his responses were, instead of replying directly, he would ask me questions about what was legal and how the government viewed devices like that. And then at the end he said his overall philosophy of dealing with explosives is that he wouldn't possess them. He would not have them in his possession. And did he say why? Either at this time or a little bit later on, he says that he's afraid of them and they're dangerous, and he doesn't have enough knowledge to possess them or to store them. And was that consistent with the facts of your investigation to that point? No, ma'am, it was not. He also does admit that he said he wanted grenades. He did at this point, and later he claims that he was only interested in them and seeking how to obtain them and finding out information of where and how he could obtain both grenades and C4. Let's turn to the next clip, which is Exhibit 4111. This also is offered against Mr. Cox only and should not be considered against the other defendants. Play the audio. At a certain point, you asked him about the cans and the produce. Yes, ma'am, I did. What was that conversation about? The conversation where I asked him, or his response. When you asked him, why were you asking him about that? Because he had placed an order for a suppressed pistol and grenades, and as part of their communication strategy, when they communicated via telephone, didn't use the terms grenades and silencers, so they used the term canned goods or produce or fruit, something like that, so that if somebody was intercepting their communications, they wouldn't know exactly what the individuals were talking about. But he told you that he was referring to freeze-dried food. That's what he told me. And what your response was. Let's move on. I didn't believe it to be a true statement, and I told him I would just rather not speak about it than have him lie to me, and that we could move on to talk about something else. During the course of the investigation, was there anything that would have been consistent with that statement? I knew that in January 2011, Mr. Cox had purchased a large quantity of freeze-dried food from someone in Goldstream area, Fairbanks, and he had paid $5,000 cash for it and had moved it and was storing it behind his house, and that he planning to leave Fairbanks and he was liquidating some of his property to raise money. He was trying to sell that freeze-dried food. So I knew that in fact had occurred, but I knew that was not what he was talking about when he was checking on the status of canned goods and produce that were supposed to arrive. At the end of that clip, Mr. Cox says, "The paperweight holes in them?" "Yes, ma'am." What was he referring to there? I took it to mean grenade bodies that were later found during the investigation. Found where? I believe all the ones that were found in Mr. Barney's trailer at the ice park. Play the audio. Again, that clip, ladies and gentlemen, is offered against Mr. Cox only and should not be considered against the other defendants. Go ahead. During this clip, Mr. Cox says, "I don't know what a hornet's nest and a sting ball is." Was that consistent with the facts of your investigation? No, ma'am. I heard him on November the 19th describe exactly what a hornet's nest was and how it functioned and how it would fit into the operational strategy of the KJNP detail. So I knew that was not a correct statement. And he says that he has the pepper grenades. What was he referring to there? We never recovered any pepper grenades. We recovered an OC pepper canister that could be launched from a 37mm launcher, and then we also recovered CS grenades that were strapped to his vest, and those did have ALS fuses. So my understanding was he was referring to the CS grenades with the fuses. I meant to clarify earlier, when you hear cans and produce, when that communication happened between Mr. Cox and Mr. Olson, what was the fruit referencing? Ms. Hayden, I'm going to object. That calls for speculation. The court, I think he may answer it. My understanding was that the canned goods was a reference to the actual silencer or the suppressor, and the produce and fruit was referring to grenades or pineapples, which is part of the earlier discussion. Let's move to the next clip, 4113. Again, this is offered against Mr. Cox, not only and not against the other defendants. Play the audio. So what did Mr. Cox tell you during that clip? The clip was specifically a question about the suppressor that he had manufactured and possessed, as opposed to the one that he had ordered and traded the rifle for, which was an earlier conversation during the interview. So in this particular audio, he describes that he understands to be taxable events subject to NFA regulations, and he says that he didn't believe or didn't know the manufacturing and possessing was a taxable event subject to NFA registration, but that if he were a dealer, then you had to have certain licensing, and that that was subject to NFA regulation. So if you were to buy and sell silencers, you have to get it registered. That's what he said his understanding was. Miss Lamoureux, let's go to Exhibit 42, Clip 4202. Again, this is offered against Mr. Cox only and not against the other defendants. Play the audio. What were you asking him about there? On February 22nd, he had told Mr. Olson that he had a Sten machine gun and that he didn't want to part with it because it had sentimental value, and that he had done some modification or conversion to that gun himself. So I was asking him specifically about that gun. Let's move to the next clip. This is 4301. This clip is offered against all defendants. Play the audio. What was that conversation about? What were you asking him about? The conversation started with me specifically asking him about taking Mr. Olson and Mr. Vernon to go to Anchorage on his behalf, and part of their tasking was attempt to get grenade bodies. And what was his response? That he didn't recall that the event happened, and he volunteered that he has a hard and fast rule that he didn't want to have anything to do with that's dangerous like that around him. Is that consistent with the facts of the investigation? No, ma'am, it's not. How so? There were numerous conversations Mr. Cox had starting on February 4th when he had sent his guys to Anchorage and to try to acquire fuses and grenade bodies, and then on February 12th where he talked about the grenades that he had already had that were armed and 2-second fuses, and that he wanted additional grenades with 8-second fuses. And then throughout February into March, he talked about acquiring grenades and stocking them up if the price was right and getting as many 8-second grenades as he could. And when on March 10th he went to meet with someone he thought was bringing him military fragmentation grenades for purchase. So it was inconsistent with all of those facts. And he also said that he doesn't have any explosives. That's what he said. And at that point you hadn't searched the trailer? No, not prior to this interview. That's correct. When did the search of the trailer happen? On March 11th, on the morning after this interview. And then at the end, he talks about gas grenades being perfectly legal, and he'd feel comfortable with those. Was it your understanding? Is he making a distinction for a gas grenade? I think he was truthfully stating that he did have gas grenades and that he was comfortable handling those, and distinguishing between the fact that he did not have any grenades that were actually explosive devices. I see you shuffling a cough drop in your mouth. Are you fighting off a cold a little bit? I've been talking too much. Speaking of explosives, did you ever ask him about C4? Yes, I did. We had a discussion about the times that he had discussed C4 and expressed an interest in acquiring it. And what did he tell you about that? He corroborated the information that Mr. Olson had provided to me, that Mr. Cox had expressed an interest in knowing where C4 was available and what its shelf life was and what its pricing would be, how they could acquire it. And when he told me he was interested in knowing these things, that he didn't have a specific use in mind for it, but it was a good thing to have in case you needed it down the road. Let's go to the next clip, which is 4303. This is offered against Mr. Cox only and not against the other defendants. Play the audio. What's the context for this clip here? What had you been talking about just prior to that? I had been asking Mr. Cox what his plans were if he hadn't been arrested that day. What was he going to do in the foreseeable future? And basically, because he was a fugitive and he had left his home, he told me that his immediate plan was to wait for spring or summer, and then he could just kind of lay low in the interior of Alaska, find some place to hide out, and see what would happen. So in this clip, I confronted him with the fact that I knew his plan was to get his family and his possessions into a truck and be smuggled through Canada to the lower 48, get them safe, and then come back. Get them safe and then come back to wage guerrilla warfare, and which was information that my source had provided to me. And he corroborated the fact that, yes, he had those discussions. Let's go to the next clip, which is 4305. This also is offered against Mr. Cox only and should not be considered against the other defendants. Play the audio. At the beginning of the clip, there's another speaker. Who is that person? Sergeant Johnson with the Alaska State Troopers. He was conducting the interview with you. He was present while I interviewed Mr. Cox. What's the conversation about? The conversation started because Sergeant Johnson was trying to think of a question that he wanted to ask. And then in the interim, while he was trying to think of that, Mr. Cox further explained that he was interested in acquiring a suppressed pistol, that he understood how lawfully you could do that, and even knew people who had done it by going through the process of obtaining a tax stamp to make it legal. And then he acknowledged that he knew there were supposed to be grenades at the site where he was arrested. But he doesn't tell you that they were grenades there. He doesn't say that, and he talks about seeking to acquire a suppressed pistol. Once again, he didn't say specifically he already had one and he wanted another. And he doesn't acknowledge that he actually did receive the grenades and handled them prior to his arrest. Did he tell you that he was interested in getting grenades? He did. But he didn't admit that he had any, correct? Let's go to the next clip, 4401. This again is offered against all defendants, and you may consider it for all purposes. Play the audio. Why are you asking him about this trailer? At this point during the interview, the searches of the defendants' homes had begun, and we knew that Mr. Cox and Mr. Barney had been loading Mr. Cox's possessions into Mr. Barney's trailer in the thought that they were going to transport him out of the state. And when we went to Mr. Barney's home and Mr. Cox's home, we did not locate the trailer, and so we were attempting to find it because we believed there was both evidence and items that could be dangerous in the trailer. So I had stepped out to make a phone call and spoke to our command post, and I was attempting to find out from him where the trailer had been taken if it was not at Mr. Barney's house. At the beginning, you were asking about Richard Olson. Who is Richard Olson? This Richard Olson is a general contractor in Fairbanks, and Mr. Barney had worked with him previously, done some jobs for him. And through their association, Mr. Olson had sold Mr. Barney a fairly large dual-axle utility trailer for Mr. Barney to use in his business, and Mr. Barney never completed, or at this point had not completed the paperwork to have the trailer registered to him. So through some type of investigative technique, I'm not sure, other agents had found out that the trailer belonged to someone named Richard Olson. And I was asking Mr. Cox who that was because it was the registered owner of the trailer. There were going to be a number of search warrants executed that same day, that's correct. Were you expecting the trailer was going to be on Coleman Barney's property? It was one of the likely possibilities. We knew it had been loaded and was being prepared to be moved with Mr. Cox's possessions. when it was not attached to Mr. Barney's truck that he drove to the parking lot where he met Mr. Olson, we knew it had been left somewhere, and we suspected it was still at Mr. Barney's residence. Did you find the trailer? Yes, ma'am, we did. And where was it? Sometime that afternoon. When you say this afternoon of March the 10th, sometime on March the 10th, yes, ma'am, around 4 or 5. Based on a variety of interviews that were being done and information that was being received, we were able to retrace Mr. Barney's steps for the day. Knew he had gone to the ice park, went there and located the trailer at the ice park. And where is the ice park? It's fairly in the middle geographically of Fairbanks. It's off a road, the main road. It's called Pegger Road, P-E-G-E-R, and it's off a side street. And then there's an entrance to the ice park. Did Mr. Cox tell you about any specific firearms that he had in the trailer? Later in the interview he did. What'd he tell you? At a later point in the interview, I had stepped back out, come back in, and told him that we had located the trailer, that we would be searching it, and I asked him again if there was anything dangerous in there that would harm law enforcement who was searching, and he assured me that there was not. And he told me that then specifically that some of the things I would find in the trailer to include the hand-cranked Browning .30 caliber weapon that had been removed from the weapons cache on Tracy or near Bradway. Did you ask him about that actually? Was that .30 caliber hand crank found in the trailer ultimately? Yes, ma'am, it was. And any other accessories related to that? There was a variety of accessories that were found. There was ammunition that I believe could fit the weapon. There was the stand, the tripod type stand, hand cranked accessory, and then there were the components. There was ammunition can of the lengths of components to make a chain or a belt for that gun. Did you also ask him about the shed, the property off the Tracy or Bradway during the course of the interview? We talked about it, yes, ma'am. Did he tell you about anything that he might have stored out there? At some point during the interview when that particular area came up, he told me that he did have his personal weapons that he owned stored out at the shed. Were there other things that you asked him about during that interview that he said, and he responded and he said things that were inconsistent with the facts of the investigation? Yes, ma'am. Can you provide some examples for the jury? Very early on in the interview, he told me that he was someone who was very open and honest about what he believed in his philosophies, and that there was nothing that he would say on the telephones or any type of other communication that he wouldn't say to my face. Essentially, he had nothing to hide. And then I confronted him with the fact that we knew what his communication strategy was and how he was using different phones, different color coordinated phones, and using particular language on the phones to conceal what they were doing, and that I didn't consider that to be a true statement. And he told me that he understood what I was saying, that he thought it was prudent if people were listening to his conversations to use a communication strategy. Did you ever ask him about Michael Anderson? There were 2 different times that I recall that I asked about Mr. Anderson or something dealing with Mr. Anderson. And what did he tell you about Michael Anderson? The first question that I recall I asked him was about if he had asked anyone working for him or under him to conduct surveillance in this case. Okay, I'm going to stop on page 21 for a second. All right, we're going to start on page 21 and see how far we can go before it's time to go to sleep. And what did he say? He told me that he had not, and to his knowledge, no surveillance had occurred, and if any surveillance at all had occurred, it was not under his direction. Why did you ask him about surveillance? Because I knew of specific examples where he had ordered people to conduct surveillance, at least 2 individuals, Mr. Olson and Mr. Anderson. I wanted to see what his response would be and how he would characterize why he had asked for or ordered that to be done. Going back to phones, did you, during the course of this investigation, did you review any phones that were seized during the course of this investigation? Yes, ma'am, I did. Let me go ahead and show you Exhibit 75, which is already admitted. Schaefer Cox's red phone seized at the arrest. What's been marked as identification as Exhibit 751, and actually, we didn't bring the actual phone in here today, Exhibit 75, but you reviewed that prior to coming into court today. Yes, ma'am, I did. And what did you do with that phone, Exhibit 75? On that particular phone, I executed a search warrant and performed an examination of that phone using an automated software and hardware tool. That's the Cellebrite? Yes, ma'am, it was. And looking at Exhibit 751, can you please let us know if you recognize that and identify that for the record? Yes, ma'am, that is a 5-page report that was produced when I did an examination of Government Exhibit 75. The government offers Exhibit 751. No objection, no objection. Miss Hayden, if I could have a minute, Your Honor. Your Honor, it doesn't apply to my client, but I think it's hearsay. Why should his report come in? He can testify about his findings, but why enter the report? It's kind of like a police report, which would be hearsay. Is there an objection? Can you explain what that report is here? There? Yes, ma'am. Exhibit 751 is an automatic. No, what? Excuse me. She's talking about 75-1. No, sorry, 751. To explain, it's not. Well, that's the exhibit number. 700 and 751, 751, 751. Yes, all right. Okay, excuse me, I interrupted. Yes, sir. Exhibit 751 is a report that's created automatically by Cellebrite. It's an extraction. It's essentially a template report that Cellebrite creates when it extracts data from a cell phone, and it puts it into rows and tables on a report to display the digital information that is extracted from a cell phone. So this is the information coming from the phone itself. This is the information that the hardware and software tool combine to produce, that it's extracted from the cellular telephone. That's not a report of you searching through and picking for certain items. That's correct. Ms. Lamoureux, the government offers Exhibit 751. My objection stands. He can testify about what he reviewed, but why does the report come in? The report is hearsay. No, 751 may be admitted. If we could turn to page 2, please, by Ms. Lamoureux. It says phone contacts here. Yes, ma'am, it does. What are those? These 5 phone contacts are automatically generated by the phone when it's activated, so they generally refer to the provider of the cell phone. Are there any names listed there in the cell phone contacts? Individuals' names? I don't see individuals' names, no ma'am. And if you look back at the first page of the report, what is the phone number of this phone? The way that this software extracts the phone number is generally within the field that is labeled MSISDN. And so this particular phone, it would be area 907, and the phone number is 268-9251. Does that report or were you able to determine that phone was actually in use? There are 2 things I could determine based upon the report that was produced. It was the date the phone was activated and the date range in which the phone was actually used by whoever was the end user. And what was the date range of its use? If I recall off the top of my head, it was generally March 1st or 2nd through and including March 10th. If we could turn to page 3, do you want the lights? If we could have the lights, Madam Clerk. There's a line that says phone incoming calls list, and there's some numbers listed below that. Yes, ma'am. And you were able to read the first 2 phone numbers there? The 2 incoming calls from area code 907, phone number 268-9261. And do you know whose number that was? I believe that was the red phone that's been issued to Mr. Olson. Miss Lamoureux, let's go to the next page. And that shows outgoing calls. Yes, ma'am, it does. And when is the first outgoing call on that phone down below? I think, no, sorry, I meant first in time chronologically at the bottom. The report listed it in reverse chronological order, so number 11 would have been the first call that was outgoing from this phone. And it was March the 1st. Let me go ahead and show you what's already been admitted as Government Exhibit 437. Do you recognize this piece of paper here? Yes, ma'am, I do. Do you have an understanding of you referred earlier to this communication strategy? Do you have an understanding of what that was? Yes, ma'am, I do. Can you please explain that to the jury? On February 22nd, 2011, Mr. Cox, Mr. Barney, and Mr. Olson met for several hours at Mr. Barney's residence to describe and to put into place another layer on their communication strategy, which was layers of phones labeled as green, yellow, and red, with red being the phones that they considered to be the most secure, and they believed that in order to keep the phones completely secure, that even the numbers to the phones could not be known, or else they would be compromised. So they came up with a strategy where the 7 digits of the phone, the first 5 digits were all similar, because they were activated phones, prepaid cell phones. And then they would black out those 5 digits and memorize the last 2 digits, which are shown here on this exhibit. So the blacking out here isn't something that we did to this document. That's correct. Okay, go ahead. And then further to secure or protect the actual red phone numbers, they devised a strategy. They would actually add a value of 1 to each remaining digit so that you see on the list as 78 as Norm Red, his phone number would actually end in 67. Schaefer's would end in 51 and so forth. And so the phone report they were looking for at the number 2689251 lines up with what you're just saying about Schaefer Cox Red 62. If you knew the code to decipher it, then yes, you would subtract the ones, and for Schaefer Red, end up with his red phone ending with the last 2 digits of 51, Mr. Olson's ending with 61, and Coleman's ending with 74. And now at the top of the page, there's some names listed. Who's Jim? Jim's yellow. It's an individual by the name of James Lee Havens, who was a friend of Mr. Cox and somebody who they had a friendship and had done business transactions together. Then there's a reference to MP Steve. Yes, ma'am. Can you tell the jury who that is? MP Steve is the individual by the name of Steve Gibson, who was a United States Army soldier assigned as a military policeman, and he had a friendship with Mr. Cox. And throughout the investigation, Mr. Cox told Mr. Olson and Mr. Barney that Gibson could provide him information off Fort Wainwright, and that he did in fact provide him information when it referred to anti-terrorism briefings that Mr. Gibson received. Did the FBI investigate Stephen Gibson? We investigated who he was to identify him. We found some documents and phones in Mr. Cox's possession that corroborated the fact that he was involved with Mr. Cox to a certain extent. I interviewed Mr. Gibson, and then I took the information that I acquired and turned it over to the United States Army to deal with as they thought appropriate. But did the FBI have a criminal investigation into Stephen Gibson? No, we did not. Are there any recorded conversations in this case that were tasked by the FBI of Stephen Gibson? No, all of the recorded conversations. He was never recorded either on phone or in person. I don't believe either of the human sources actually met him either. Miss Lamoureux, if we could have the lights, Madam Clerk. I'm going to go ahead and bring you a few items which are already admitted. Exhibits 700 through 720. Exhibits 700 through 702 are already admitted. They're DNA swabs. Can you please tell the jury what your connection is to those DNA swabs? Yes, ma'am. Sometime after the arrest in March, subsequent to a search warrant, I collected what are called known DNA standards, DNA samples, from 4 individuals. And what is in Exhibit 700 through 702? These are the actual known standards, the cotton tip swabs that I used to collect known DNA standards from the 4 individuals. From the 4 or the 3 defendants, 700. These particular 3 were collected from Mr. Cox, Mr. Barney, and Mr. Lonnie Vernon. And turning to Exhibit 720, which has already been admitted, can you tell the jury what your connection is to that exhibit? Exhibit 720 is what is known as a set of known prints or standard fingerprints, and 720 specifically as a set of major case fingerprints of Schaefer Cox that I collected. For the record, I've handed you what's been identified as Government Exhibit 792. During the course of this investigation, Mr. Cox's iPhone that he was using in February or up to mid-February 2011 was reviewed by law enforcement. Is that correct? Yes, ma'am, that's true. There was a search warrant for that phone. There was a state of Alaska. Can I get to page 40?
Yeah, I want to show you something amazing. Can you press pause?
Or if I do, it may not start up again, but okay. Hold on. Yes, ma'am, that's true. There was a search warrant for that iPhone. There was a state of Alaska search warrant that was issued and executed upon his iPhone somewhere around February 15, 2011. And how did that iPhone come into law enforcement possession? While Mr. Cox was a fugitive and staying out at Lonnie and Karen Vernon's house, he was tasking Mr. Olson to complete errands on his behalf. And one of those errands that he tasked him to complete was to take the iPhone and leave it powered on at his residence at Scenic Loop in case law enforcement was searching for that iPhone specifically. Why leave the iPhone on? I don't understand. Calls for speculation, Miss Hayden. The court, well, the objection is sustained. I don't know where this information may come from. Did you review that iPhone? I physically had the iPhone in my possession. I did not do the forensic extraction of it. Can you explain what happened with the iPhone, with the phone? I took the phone into my possession and, I'm sorry, where did you get the phone? The phone was given to Mr. Olson. When I met with Mr. Olson after he left the Vernon's house on February the 14th, I met to debrief him. And like I said, the standard for our debriefs was to receive information, receive back any recording devices, and receive anything that had been given to him. In this particular instance, he had been given a number of items by Mr. Cox, one of which was a phone that he had given to me. And what did you do with the phone? I took the phone and turned it over to Fairbanks Police Department, Officer Avery Thompson, who was assigned to the Alaska Task Force, who gave it to him to take to his possession to have a cellular extraction done of the phone subsequent to a search warrant. And did he do that? He did. And then what did you do? I physically received the phone back into my possession, and then I got a copy of the report that Mr. Thompson had produced through his cellular extraction. And what is Exhibit 792? 792 is a summary exhibit of the text messages that were recovered from Mr. Cox's phone from the forensic report that Investigator Thompson produced when he did an examination of Mr. Cox's iPhone. Those text messages were produced in his report, were taken out of his report, and exported to Microsoft Excel, and then arranged in what we call message threads, where the individual that the text message was going back and forth to were lined up so you could see individual conversation that Mr. Cox was having with individuals who were maintained in his contact book. And so Exhibit 792 doesn't reflect all of the texts that were on Schaefer Cox's phone. It does not. Just some selected text. That's correct. The government offers Exhibit 792. No objection. 792 admitted. If we could have the lights, please. We're looking now at Government Exhibit 792. This is the Excel spreadsheet that you were just describing to the jury. Yes, ma'am, it is. Can you briefly describe what the columns are, the ones that we'll be discussing? Yes, ma'am. Moving from left to right on the document, the number column has a unique identifier that corresponds to a row in the database on the phone that the message was extracted from. The number references the number of the cellular telephone that Mr. Cox was communicating via SMS text messaging. In the name column, if there's a value there, the value came from the contact book or an address book of Mr. Cox's iPhone, and it is a name or value that corresponds to the phone number in the left-hand column, or the column just to the left of the name. The date and time, Alaska time, is the date and time corrected for Alaska's time zone. As to the very far right, in the date and time in the GMT, which was how the text message was maintained on the phone itself. And then the phone column has a value in the status and photo that's pretty similar, showing that whether these messages were sent or received, where the message was actually stored and recovered from phone storage as opposed to some other type of memory card storage. And type is whether the message is outgoing or incoming. And then text is actual content of the message that was sent or recovered. Deleted is a yes or no column that shows whether or not the message was recovered from a deleted space on the phone, whether it is still contained in the actual SMS application of the phone. The exhibit has multiple pages. It is 17 pages. I believe it has 17, yes ma'am. How are the conversations organized on the spreadsheet here? They're, like I said, they put into what are called message threads, where you have different individuals who Mr. Cox was communicating with, and specific messages to and from the individual are grouped together. And then within the grouping, those individuals, generally they are chronological by date and time. If we look at the first text, the substance, there says Christmas wish list. Yes, ma'am. What items in there are relevant to that investigation? This was a message that was sent out to numerous individuals that have multiple recipients with text messages. And we just pick one particular individual who was identified as Bean. And that particular relevant information is that Mr. Cox was looking for a threaded barrel for a .30 caliber Glock pistol, and it's going out from Schaefer Cox's iPhone. This was sent from his iPhone to multiple recipients. Now below that there are texts with another individual. Yes, ma'am, there are. And who is that? A person that's identified the phone book as Barney Coleman. And if we look at the bottom line there, November 23rd, 2010, yes, ma'am, what is that text? It's a text that was sent on the morning of the 23rd. It's outgoing message from Mr. Cox's phone to the individual identified as Barney Coleman. And it says that KNJP is a go, and that we'll still send a small team to the courthouse at 3. Let's turn to the next page. Now this page, all of these texts are with Coleman Barney. Yes, ma'am, they are. Now if we look at 5:21 p.m., these are all on well, except for the last one, November 23rd, 2010. Correct. The majority of the messages of this page are back and forth, incoming and outgoing text message, communication back and forth between Mr. Cox's iPhone and the person in contact list identified as Coleman Barney. And at 5:21 p.m., there's a text from Coleman Barney, yes ma'am, and it says what? It says no bees. Do you know what that's a reference to? I can only speculate. At 6:28, yes ma'am, there's an outgoing text to Coleman Barney. What does it say? The outgoing message says,
Have had 2 cops lurking around me outside Safeway. Maybe nothing. And then at 8:09 p.m., yes, ma'am, there's an incoming text. Yes, ma'am, what does it say? It says, we're almost set up. Let me know when you're close to the rendezvous. And then at 9:29 p.m., yes, ma'am, there's an incoming. Yes, ma'am. What does that one say? It's a response to a message that had been sent out from Mr. Cox's phone, letting Barney Coleman know what his current location was, and he was at Dawson Exit, and the message came back, and the content of it was, wait there. After November 23rd series of text, what's the date of the next conversation? That, on the bottom line there was a message on that sent by Mr. Cox's phone December 7th, 2010, in the evening at 7:54. And what does that one say? The content says, just talk to Major M.A.J., period. Thessing about a battle plan. Look for a call from him and get your men set for Friday, 3:30, and spread the word that the Freedom Guinea Pig is going in. Page 38. Miss Lamoureux, can we go to the next page? There's a text on December 10th, 2010 at midnight. Well, 12:06. Yes, ma'am, I see that. This is still continuing text with Barney Coleman. Yes, ma'am, it is. Okay, what does 12:06 a.m. text say? This is an outgoing message from the iPhone that says, I tried to be reachable. I ignored lots of calls and texts, but this evening, you, Lieutenant Colonel Zorby, and Major Thessing much get the red phone priority. I'm reading it now. If we go to the next page, there are a continuation of text with Barney Coleman. Yes, ma'am, there are. There is one on December 12th at 2:33. Yes, ma'am, there is. What does that one say? It's an outgoing message sent from Mr. Cox's iPhone that says, we need to meet as soon as you can. Major T and I will work around your schedule. Let's go to the next page. What is the first text about? Do you know? I have an understanding of what it's about. Yes, ma'am. What is it about? Mr. Barney had access to sources that he could buy food in bulk, and he could share with resources with other people. And this is a description of, if it's in contact with Mr. Cox, was going to pay $5,000 for freeze-dried food from the individual in the Golden Stream area. And this is a message in my understanding of what Mr. Barney could get for him for $5,000 from his sources. And then there is a conversation. There's a text on January 12, 2011 at the bottom line there. Yes, ma'am, and it's an outgoing message. What's it say? It says jury training call Friday, 8 o'clock AK time. And then a phone number and a PIN number to access a conference line. Miss Lamoureux, let's go to the next page. There's another text with Coleman Barney on February 10th, 2011. Yes, ma'am. What does that say? The outgoing message says, look to show up to court Monday with a common law judgment and an FTC complaint for if they move forward may need some guys for security, etc. And do you know what that's in reference to? It's a reference to the February 14th court date. That was approaching at that time that Mr. Cox or somebody sent that message from Mr. Cox's phone. And the next text on February 11th, 2011, what does that one say? That one was sent later in the evening on February 11th, and it says, nix that last message. I'm not playing anymore, but let's send a few recon guys on Monday and make the rest a little extra vigilant. So that's still the same Monday, the 14th. My understanding is it's still in reference to the upcoming court date that was scheduled on Monday, February the 14th. Below that thread, there's a series of texts with Aaron Bennett. Yes, ma'am. On November the 18th, 2010, that's an outstanding message. There's an outgoing message. What's the first one say? The first one says, the meeting went way long last night. I'll call you today. Still need armor and thumb cuffs. And what does the last line say there? The last line on the page, affirmative. The outgoing message says, seriously though, because they are small and light to carry, I need 6 pair and 6 regular cuffs. 2, used is okay, whatever is the best deal. Okay, I'm tired. I'm going to stop on page 41. We'll pick it up when I get some time later.
Okay, picking up with page 41. Miss Lamoureux, let's go to page 8. On October 22nd, 2010, what is that text? There was an outgoing message that is sent from this phone to an individual in the phone book as Tony Davis. What does that say? The content of that message says, well, it's good to meet you, Badass Abby. I live in the Arctic of Alaska. We are trying to win our independence from the U.S. government and or stooges. It has been a 50-year battle, and Tony is helping us tie the cord in knots. But you can only fight tyrants with paper so long, and I fear the paper is coming to an end. We have been seeing more blood and less paper lately. I joined 3 years ago. Very few are left who started in the beginning. But liberty always wins because tyranny self-destructs. Be well and never ask permission to be free. Periods, Schaefer Cox. And then below that there's a thread. There's text with a contact identified as Lon Gems. Yes, ma'am. Did you have an understanding of who that is? It's an individual by the name of James Lee Havens, the same person we saw on the previous exhibit 437. The list of the yellow and red phones, yes ma'am, that's my understanding. On October 6, 2010, there's an incoming text, and what does that say? It says, had you made some good weapons? Need to know where to send them. Should be ready this week. And then the following message. Outgoing message says, Jim, I need 6 duty belts. Belt, radio, gun, cuffs, mags, taser. Do you have? And the following message. Outgoing message says, like cops use. And then on October 19, 2010, there's an incoming message. Yes, ma'am. What does that say? It says, how many autos do you want me to pick up? Miss Lamoureux, if we could go to the next page, October 20th. What's the incoming message? The incoming says, okay, I will win. I'll get out of here. I can't get police autos, hard to find anymore. Through friend normal 2000 can get 5 or 6 hun. Depends on which one you get. Going to eat at the best Chinese place in LA, only 5. And then on October 23rd, there's an outgoing message. There's several at 9:59. 9:59, it says duty belt, radio cuffs, 2 Glock .30, 45 mags, taser, mace. And then after that, there's a text about a holster, a Glock holster. Yes, ma'am, there are. If we go to the next page on November 22nd, there's an incoming message at 11:14 p.m. Yes, ma'am, what does that say? The incoming message has got 5 full auto machine guns. What's the one on the day before that say? The incoming message on November 21st at 7:05 p.m. Is that which one you're referring to? Affirmative. It says, I know how to make big bombs. Just kill them all and let God sort them out. Okay, going back to November 22nd, text incoming. Hold on. That was an incoming message. Yes, ma'am, that says tapped phone with an exclamation point, correct. And then within a minute of that, what's the response? The incoming reply is, even text, okay, sorry. And then the outgoing response, no problem, nothing illegal about machine guns in America. And if you could just go ahead and read the next few minutes conversation on that night of November 22nd. The next incoming message says, one is from 1933, it was my dad's, like new. The outgoing response is, I need a real Israeli Uzi, let's call it a Jew toy. The incoming says, got two, one for you, but I like Tommy 45s. 100 rounds. Outgoing reply is a lightweight Uzi. Also an outgoing reply is a text to pick. The incoming reply is, I will show you. Got them hidden away. Only weigh about the same as a 45 you gave me or less. I will hook you up. I can get anything down here. My dad left me 3 fulls. I had 2 from my brother, and the outgoing reply is, get it to me and name your price. Now, is this the first time you saw a reference to an Israeli Uzi in this investigation, or I guess an Uzi? Chronologically, this is the first time, and subsequently I saw it again. When did you see it again? Sometime around March 1st when Mr. Cox sent Mr. Olson to pick up the C93. He sent a note to Rob Carr. He included a message on there about an Uzi that he no longer needed. And there was a text about duty belts. Yes, ma'am. Were any duty belts recovered from the execution of the search warrants in this case? Yes, ma'am. There was a duty belt type police gear recovered at Mr. Cox's residence and out of Mr. Barney's trailer. Let's go to the next page. There was a few texts that were Lon Gems, and then there's another series of texts about another individual. Yes, ma'am. And who's that individual? It's identified in the contact book at Nichols Joe. And can you go ahead and read the thread from, it's November 24th at midnight? Yes, ma'am, it is. So that's the night of November 23rd, basically. I mean, it's just after the date change at midnight from November 23rd to November 24th. So that's the KJNP night. It's Mr. Cox's appearance from 9 to 10 on November the 23rd. And this is approximately 2 hours later. Okay. And what's that thread? The incoming message from Nichols Joe says, do we need to watch tonight? And the outgoing response is, well, yes, but We have 10 guys in the house. It's if we all keep a gun close, that's enough. That is enough, I think. AR-15 at the top of the steps with a hornet's nest. Incoming reply back is Glock under my pillow. Wake me if you need me. And during the post-arrest interview, Mr. Cox told you he didn't know what a hornet's nest was? That's what he told me. Counsel, it's about time we took a break. We're going to be out of the sink this morning. With our breaks a bit, we'll try to 3 short breaks. Let's keep it to 10 minutes. All rise. This matter is in recess. All rise. His dishonorable, the court, the United States District Court is again in session. Please be seated. Okay, you can bring the jury in. All right, you may continue, Mr. Lamoureux, Miss Lamoureux. I want to go back. If we could have the lights, to the red phone that we were discussing earlier, the Samsung phone. We talked about the outgoing and incoming calls. There were also text messages recovered from that phone. Yes, ma'am, there were. And what was the activation date again on the red phone? I believe this phone was activated February 22nd of 2011. And if you go to the text message, there's an outgoing message. Yes, ma'am. The first outgoing message, what does that say? The message was sent to the red phone of Mr. Olson from this red phone, and the content of the text is got canned goods, ? Canned goods, that's what we're talking about earlier from the post-arrest interview. Recordings regarding canned goods and produce. Yes, ma'am. Let's go back to Exhibit 792 and Shaver Cox's iPhone. Miss Lamoureux, if we could go to page 11, please. At the bottom there's a text with Brandon Phillips. Yes, ma'am, there is. And it's dated December 6, 2010 at 9:39. If you could please read the text to the jury. It's an incoming text message that was received on Mr. Cox's iPhone. And it says, how was the Tupperware party? Did you really tell just that you had the AST outmanned and outgunned? What's your understanding of what was in the reference to? The particular text is in reference to an article that had run in the News Miner, local newspaper, after Mr. Cox had made those comments to Alaska State Trooper Sergeant Schoenberg. And if we go to the next page, please, there's an outgoing message. Yes, ma'am. What does that text say? The one at 10:29 p.m.? Affirmative. The outgoing message says it's all spin doctors. The quote-unquote judge almost issued a bench warrant because I would not talk to him. We just slapped a criminal complaint on him and walked out. And what's the rest of that thread? It says, did you really tell him that you have a AST outgun? The outgoing reply is, that's what I told my friend Tim, who's a trooper. Incoming question, Schoenberg? Outgoing answer, yeah. Outgoing is a cool guy, you know him. Outgoing, he's totally on our side. Incoming back is, yeah, great dude. Do you know who Brandon Phillips is? I do. Who is he? He's a gentleman who is a friend of Mr. Cox's. He got out of the United States Army in Fairbanks and works as a realtor in town and had developed a relationship and a friendship with Mr. Cox. And that was the text message was in response to a related court hearing that Schaefer Cox had at the State House. Yes, ma'am, that's true. I went back to page 3 of the text. There's a series of texts here again with Coleman Barney. And yes, ma'am, there are. Whoops. There's some of the date. There's some that are dated December 10th, 2010 at the bottom. Yes, ma'am, I see those. Can you read the thread starting at 12:40 p.m.? An outgoing message sent by Mr. Cox's phone to Barney Coleman asks the question, how's it going? The incoming replies back is, good, heading into town to meet up with A-Team. Outgoing is good, is all coming together okay. Do you know what was going on December 10th, 2010? Yes, ma'am, I do. What was that? Mr. Cox had a calendar call scheduled in state court. The militia had a security operation and plan in place, and Major Barney was in charge of that security detail. Lamoureux, let's go to page 13. There's a text at the bottom of Ken Thessing. Yes, ma'am. It's stated at the bottom there, February 11th, 2011. Yes, ma'am, that's correct. And what is that text? It's an outgoing text that was sent from Mr. Cox's phone at 11:13 at night, Alaska time to an individual or to a phone identified as Ken Thessing, and it says officers meeting at your place. Miss Lamoureux, can we go to the next page? The top line there continues that thread. It does. And what's the next? Also an outgoing message. The next outgoing message, approximately a minute later, also to Ken Thessing, says, officer meeting at your place around 9:30, okay? Was there a meeting held at Ken Thessing's place? Yes, ma'am, there was. When was that? The morning of February 12th. 2011. Relevant to your investigation, what information was learned from that meeting? It was during that meeting that we first heard several things. One, that Mr. Cox had a list of individuals about whom he was acquiring personal information, and there was an operation or a plan that ended up being called 2-for-1, and that Mr. Cox was seeking to arm himself with additional grenades, 8-second grenades in addition to the 2-second grenades that he already possessed. So that was the first time, did you say, the first time you heard about this list? This was the first time we heard about any type of list about an operation or mission 2-for-1. And when did you learn about Michael Anderson? By name, we learned about him on that evening when I sent Mr. Olson to Mr. Cox's house at a follow-up. Mr. Cox provided information about who was compiling this information or database and identified that person as Michael Anderson. What did you do in response to learning this information? How did you task Mr. Olson? Specifically, after the first meeting of the day, the morning after Major Thessing's bus, I had Mr. Olson contact Mr. Cox on the phone as a follow-up to see if he could get some information, to see if there really was information, and to see if Mr. Cox was interested in having Mr. Olson do surveillance on those residences. And subsequent to that call, Mr. Olson was invited to Mr. Cox's house, given some information, and subsequently thereafter, continually, when Mr. Olson would meet with Mr. Cox, I would task him to find out about several things. If there actually was a list and what information was on it regarding Mission 2-for-1 or Operation 2-for-1, if that was in actuality a plan, when the plan was enacted at the direction of Mr. Cox. Why did you want to get that information? We were very concerned about understanding to what extent Mr. Cox had compiled information about law enforcement officers and judicial officials. We wanted to see if it was true claim and how much information there was. And because not only there was alleged to be a database, but there was some type of plan to act the information contained in that database, we were very concerned about what might prompt or what might trigger 2-for-1, when that might become operational for this group. Between February 12, 2011 and March 10, 2011, did you task Mr. Olson specifically with regard to trying to get that information? Repeatedly. It was pretty much standing requirement that I reiterated that he was trying to get his hands on a list, if one existed, and he was found out if 2-for-1 was actually a possible mission of this group. What would trigger it, and whether that trigger changed all along the way in response to things that were occurring with Mr. Cox and his associates. And what did Mr. Olson do to follow those directions? He attempted to contact Mr. Anderson after Mr. Cox gave him Mike Anderson's contact information. He attempted to get that same information to the Vernons because they knew Mike Anderson. He attempted to engage Mr. Cox, Mr. Vernon, and Mr. Barney in conversations about Operation 2-for-1 and determine what their plans were, and the likelihood was that they actually became a reality, that would actually become a reality. Do you know if he ever tried to actually see Mr. Anderson in person? On March the 7th, 2011, Mr. Olson went and picked up Mr. Cox from Mr. Barney's residence, and they went together to the gun shop and received the lower trigger group. They had made a plan that after they would actually go out to where Mr. Anderson lives and try to find him face to face. And so Mr. Cox gave directions to Mr. Olson, showed him to where Mr. Anderson lived. They went there, left a message with the people who were at the residence because Mr. Anderson wasn't there. And then they went to several businesses and several residences in an attempt to find Mr. Anderson so that Mr. Olson could speak to him face to face in presence of Mr. Cox. Did you ask Sheriff Cox about this in the post-arrest interview? Yes, ma'am, I did. What did you ask him? I asked him basically what I just did, and what, in context of Mr. Cox agreed to take Mr. Olson out there to Mr. Anderson lives to find him and attempt to get the list from Mr. Anderson. And what did Sheriff Cox say to you at that point? That day that they weren't going out there to try to get a list, but they were going out there to visit with Mr. Anderson because he had been off the grid, and they didn't. I lost my spot here. Hold on. Oh, hold on. He had been off the grid and they hadn't seen him in a while. Let's go to page 14. There's a series of texts with Lonnie Vernon. Yes, ma'am, there are. Looking at one on January 31st, 2011. Can you read that outgoing text, please? The outgoing text says, you want to go to a militia summit in Anchorage Saturday the 5th. It's for commanders and their seconds, but we are taking a whole crew. Are you in? We will carpool Friday night. Did you ask Sheriff Cox about that in the post-arrest interview? Yes, ma'am, I did. And what did he say? He specifically asked What I specifically asked him was when Mr. Vernon and Mr. Olson went to the summit, had he tasked them to obtain grenade bodies and C4s, and he did not recall doing that. Let's go back to the next page. My apologies if we could go back then. Then there's a series of texts with Vernon and Lonnie. They're on February 4th and February 5th. Do you see those? Yes, ma'am. There's one in outgoing on February 5th at 9:25 that says, "Put me on speakerphone." Yes, ma'am. Do you know what that relates to? Yes, ma'am, I do. What is it? That was Saturday morning when they were actually having the conference on the planned agenda in relation to the militia summit, and Mr. Cox wanted to be able to hear and interact since he wasn't physically there, so they had made plans to use either Skype or phone or speakerphone to allow him to participate telephonically. And so that's while Lonnie Vernon and Mr. Olson was down in Anchorage during the militia summit. Yes, ma'am. Let's go to the next page. There's an outgoing text. Yes, ma'am. What does that say? It says, "Don't gossip. That's an order. Good job, guys. Can't wait to see you." If we go to page 16, on January 30, 2011, there's some text with Ron Warner. Do you know who Ron Warner is? I do not. There's an outgoing message at 11:59 a.m. Yes, ma'am. What does that say? It says, "I got my Glock in my car, hearts." And what are the following two texts? Mr. Cox's cell phone receives an incoming message that says, "Looked everywhere. Can't find you on Twitter." And the outgoing reply is 00 Shaver Cox. And there's a series of texts with Jeff Williams. Yes, ma'am. On February 5th, 2011 at 8:08, there's an outgoing message. Yes, ma'am. What does that say? It says senatecox.secret.box. And then the text with Jeff Williams, there's at 8:17 p.m. is outgoing message. What does that say? It says, I'm FaceTime with FBI. The bottom line on this page shows the text with Zerby Less. Yes, ma'am. What's the date of that? This was sent February 11th, 2011, Alaska time at 11:12. And what does that say? It says, I'll call you Saturday at 12 around 10:30 AK time for officers meeting. And that's the same February 12th meeting that you just described at Kent Thessing. Yes, ma'am, it is. If we go to the next page, there's text on January 11th, 2001. Do you see at the top line there? The first one, 11:29 a.m. Yes, ma'am, I do. It's an outgoing. Yes, ma'am, it is. And what does that say? It says, federal agents tried to kill me and my wife last summer. No fun at all. And the follow-up at 11:35 a.m. They try to kill you. They try to kill anyone who knows the difference between law and statute who is successfully building a resistance. And then they try to kill the name before they kill the man. Don't believe all the Associated Press crap. Get the skinny on YouTube. Do you know if Mr. Cox's speeches appear on YouTube? Yes, ma'am, they do. I have no other questions for this witness at this time. Traverso, good morning. Cross-examination. Good morning, sir. Good morning, sir. Do you belong to the Joint Terrorism Task Force? The Joint Terrorism Task Force is an entity in Anchorage that comprises a squad of FBI division, and that is where I'm currently assigned. Yes, sir. The answer is yes, yes, sir. Okay, Squad 6 is it called? No, sir. Its squad designation used to be Squad 3. Now its designation is NS1. NS1, has it ever been called Squad 6? No, sir. I used to work for a Squad 6 earlier in my career at Fairbanks, but Squad 6 was never the JTTF. Okay, now in February 2010, you stated that there was a preliminary investigation open, correct? Yes, sir, that's my understanding. And it was designated as February 16, 2010 as the date that the investigation was open, correct? I don't know exactly, but I believe that's very close. But it also had an end date, did it not, on August 14, 2010? We had a preliminary investigation. There's a time delineation that the case is going to be open. Either it's converted into a different type of investigation or it expires. So I believe it is 6 months if memory serves. So when is it open in February? It would be given 6 months for the case agent to either substantiate or allegations or discover additional criminal contact or close the case. So it had an end date of August 14, 2010. That's approximately when it would have been. Yes, sir. Okay, and the information that the Joint Terrorism Task Force was receiving, that gave rise to the preliminary investigation. In February 2010, this investigation was going to be worked by Squad 6, which is not the JTTF. At some point later in the investigation, staffing and resources-wise, when I was moved to a different squad, that was January 20th, 2011. When I moved to a different squad, the case went with me under the JTTF at that point. Squad 6 made up of agents from Fairbanks and Anchorage, or was there agents from outside the state that were also assigned to the squad? In August of 2010, Squad 6 was comprised of myself, my partner in Fairbanks, and then 7 or 8 agents in Anchorage. And that was the sum total of Squad 6. Okay, and your partner in Fairbanks, would that be Special Agent Milne? Yes, sir, okay. Now, was Francis Schaefer Cox a suspected terrorist in February 2010? I guess it would have been, depending on different definitions of suspected terrorist. Okay, I'm going to stop here on page 61. Okay, let's pick up on 61 and maybe go for 20 more pages. I guess it would depend on different definitions of suspected terrorist. He was suspected or alleged to have been involved in activity that would have been construed as potential terrorism. Potential terrorism. Yes, sir, that's a category that the FBI investigates. If some argumentative, the objection's overruled. Mr. Traverso, if allegations are made against an individual that they have committed or may commit or will commit criminal acts that fall within our definition of terrorism, then yes, we do investigate that. Question. Okay, in fact, Mr. Cox was a very outspoken critic of the government, correct? Yes, sir, he was. And he made a lot of speeches in several states, Montana, Alaska, Idaho, Colorado. Are you aware of him making speeches in the Midwest and Northwest? Yes, sir, I am. Okay, did you review any of those speeches, by the way? Yes, sir, I have. Okay, did any of those speeches suggest imminent lawless action against the government? In my opinion, when I listened to the speeches, yes, sir, there were some that did. Imminent? There was a speech in which he said, "We're on the edge of bloodshed in the streets of Fairbanks." Okay, did he state in that speech that he had a mobile unit that was going to attack federal courthouse? In November of 2009, he said that he had some mobile units, but he did not say that they were en route to attack anybody. Okay, do you understand that if someone is trying to induce or produce imminent lawless action against the government, that is a violation of law, correct? United States or federal statute, under federal law. Ms. Lamoureux, objection, relevance, traversal. This is all going to him being a suspected terrorist, Your Honor. Ms. Lamoureux, he's not charged with any of these crimes. Traverso, he's been talking about criminal activity. The court, we have to go back to the question, and the question is overruled. He may answer it. Can you ask me again, Mr. Traverso? That was a long-winded question. I don't know if I can ask it again. Were you aware that if somebody is inducing or producing imminent lawless action against a government, then that is a federal violation of law? If you're quoting a specific statute under 18 U.S.C., I'm not familiar with the statute. I know there are statutes under 18 U.S.C. that deal with individuals who advocate overthrow or violence against the government, and that under those specific statutes, and it is lawless, yes, sir. Okay, and so there was a unit assigned to called a counterterrorism unit. I guess that was investigating Mr. Cox at that point in February of 2010. No, sir, in February 2010, this investigation was opened and it was assigned to Special Agent Milne. And he was the case agent and I was the co-case agent. And the two of us conducted an investigation for the next 10 months. Okay, now the speeches that were drawing attention, would that be called the solution speech? There were several speeches that Mr. Cox made that were reported to us, and the content of the message of the speech was very similar at different locations. And at one of those locations, somebody took the content of the speech and uploaded it to YouTube in a series of videos that's called The Solution. And kind of the motto of these speeches, or the significant mark of these speeches, is that he talks about liberty always wins and tyranny always self-destructs. Is that correct? That is one of the themes that he speaks about, yes, sir. Okay, he also talks about, does he not, in these speeches, that if there's a collapse of the government and there's chaos, tyranny on the streets, that we need militias, citizen militias, to deal with the chaos, correct? Objection, hearsay, and relevance. It's based on his investigation, Your Honor. I'm not sure exactly how your question was phrased. All right, rephrase it. Okay. You were paying close attention to the speeches of Mr. Cox, correct? When we became aware of the speeches that he made, whether it was through citizens reporting or if we became aware that a speech had been posted on YouTube, then we will go review that speech. We weren't keeping up real time with all the speeches that he was making, but he did review a number of them at some point during the investigation. Question. And he never crossed the line, did he, between First Amendment speech and what you would call criminal? Ms. Lamoureux, objection, calls for a legal conclusion. Sustained. Traverso, did you ever believe that you needed to arrest Mr. Cox for any of his speeches? For the speeches that he made in Montana, Idaho, Illinois, Colorado, for the content of those speeches, I never suggested that he be arrested for the content of any of those speeches. Okay, but he was being tracked very carefully, wasn't he? In February of 2010, yes. No, sir. During the 6-month period that you spoke of, from February to August, yes. No, sir, he was not. He wasn't. No, sir. There was an investigation open, but he wasn't being tracked. There were 2 of us investigating him. We never followed him. We never limited human source we had very limited human source coverage during that window. We did receive information from other law enforcement partners, and from our citizens, we did review open source speeches and things that he made, but we weren't conducting surveillance or following him around. Okay, now did you ever videotape Mr. Cox at a concert? Officer Avery Thompson videotaped Mr. Cox, I think it was an Everclear concert in July of 2010. When Mr. Thompson was there, not in law enforcement capacity, he ran into Mr. Cox. He took some videotape of him with his iPhone and provided it to the FBI. Okay, in June of 2010, you became aware that Mr. Cox had gone to Fort Wainwright trying to seek some sort of protection there. Is that your state? Is that what you're stated on your direct? Yes, sir. That's my understanding. And you said there were 2 other people with him? That was my understanding as well. Who were the 2 other people? I don't know. I believe from my recollection that one of them had been his wife. I believe that one of his brothers may have been with him. I can't be certain of that. Would his son have been with him? If his wife was with him, then I would assume that his son may have been with him. Yes, sir. Okay, now do you know what time of day that was? I recall that after it happened, my partner went to the trooper headquarters in town to meet with the Fort Wainwright Police and Captain Barrick. I went to the base, and for some reason I think it was after in the afternoon, but I could be wrong on that. Okay, were you following Mr. Cox at the time? No, sir. Okay, were you made aware that Mr. Cox had gone to the post? The Fort Wainwright Police have a duty desk, and the duty desk would forward it to whoever was on the duty commander in the Fort Wainwright Police Department. They reported it up the chain to the individual who's in charge of law enforcement, fire, and rescue services at Fort Wainwright, a gentleman by the name of Maurice Fisher. And Mr. Fisher and a gentleman by the name of Kendall Greenleaf, who was the chief of the Fort Wainwright Police Department, decided to report that information out to the troopers and to the FBI. So either Fort Wainwright PD or the Alaska State Troopers made a call to the FBI in Fairbanks and asked us to meet with him and relay briefly what had happened. So my partner decided that we would go meet with Chief Greenleaf on Captain Barrett, and he asked me to go onto the base and to meet with the individuals who were on duty at the duty desk for the Fort Wainwright Police Department. What reports, if we can jump a little bit, what reports have you received that either Francis Schaefer Cox and or the militia, the Alaska Peacemakers Militia, had detonated the grenade? Throughout the whole investigation, yes. The only 2 instances that came to my mind are a conversation Mr. Cox had with Mr. Barney on February 12th, when Mr. Cox was seeking to get 8-second fuses and talking about how the 2-second fuses are pretty quick and that you have to have your arm cocked and ready to go when you pull the pin. And then on March the 1st, when Mr. Cox was speaking to Mr. Olson, he referenced the same 2-second fuse, and he described it as reliable. I insinuated from that he had knowledge that they had actually detonated. Okay, have you received any information that Francis Schaefer Cox and or Alaska Peacemakers Militia had detonated grenades? Did you receive any reports from any citizen or any police force that had happened? No, sir, we did not. Okay, now you described that you call him a confidential source. If you don't mind, I'd like to call him an informant. Okay. The informant from Anchorage was Mr. Fulton, correct? Yes, sir. And the informant in Fairbanks was Mr. Olson. Yes, sir, that's true. Okay, and are you stating that who was coordinating Mr. Fulton's trip up here to engage in operations up here? Was that you or was that another agent out of Anchorage? To my knowledge, he was made 2 trips to Fairbanks, Mr. Fulton did. One was in June of 2011, one was in June of 2010, and one was in March of 2011. The first trip in June of 2010, Special Agent Klein and Special Agent Epstein coordinated this trip to Fairbanks with Special Agent Milne. And in March of 2011, myself and Special Agent Epstein and Special Agent Klein coordinated Mr. Fulton's trip to Fairbanks for the purpose of the arrest scenario. When Were you aware of what the purpose of Mr. Fulton's trip was to Fairbanks at that time in June of 2010? I became aware after the fact. I don't know it before he traveled. So the FBI in Anchorage had a plan to send up an informant and keep you out of the loop. Objection, misstates. Traversal, no. No, he may answer it. The FBI in Anchorage had a source that we were going to take task to travel to Fairbanks. We divided geographically our territory up into what we term areas of responsibility. And the Anchorage Division covers the whole state of Alaska, which encompasses Fairbanks. As a matter of courtesy, if the Anchorage office is going to operate within Fairbanks territory, they let us know that what's going on for the agent Milne know ahead of time that a source would be traveling. I myself did not find out about it until after the fact. So it's just a matter of courtesy that you are coordinating with the Anchorage office. It's for the purpose of courtesy, deconfliction, information sharing, that we are several reasons. But if there are agents who are assigned an area of responsibility and a different agent is going to be operate in their territory, then yes, I would consider it both courtesy and deconfliction to coordinate that. And with Mr. Cox, the concern was there a plan that was being generated by the Anchorage office to have Mr. Fulton come here and make contact with Mr. Cox? I can tell you what I know after the fact. I just want to know if there was a plan. Was there a plan? My understanding after the fact was that Mr. Fulton reported that he had been invited to the grand opening of the Far North Tactical Surplus Store, and that after the grand opening, individuals were going to have opportunity to set up both booths, tables, display areas, and that Mr. Fulton was going to travel there for the purpose of his business. Mr. Fulton had been told that Mr. Cox would have a table set up and that he would have a chance to interact with Mr. Cox. So he was tasked to travel to Fairbanks for the purpose of FBI business along with his personal business to meet with Mr. Cox when he was in Fairbanks that weekend. But Mr. Fulton was also was going to pick Pike's Landing, right? I don't know. You don't know anything about Pike's Landing? I know that occurred. I don't know ahead of time if he was told to do that. You know that occurred. You don't know what was going on with Mr. Fulton at Pike's Landing either? I can tell you what I know after the fact. Well, what was the plan at Pike's Landing after the fact, as you know it? I don't know what the plan was. I know that there was a meeting at Pike's Landing, which is also a motel or hotel facility. Mr. Cox, Les Serby, Jeremy Baker, and Bill Fulton met in a motel room for an hour or two and had discussions about several points. Okay, now was the Pike's Landing effort as well as the Blondies or Far North Tactical effort, were both of those pieces designated as meeting places with Mr. Cox by the informant out of Anchorage? Objection vague. Is it? Mr. Traverso, I can rephrase the question. Yeah, Your Honor. Was Pike's Landing and Far North Tactical or Blondies, as you know it, in Fairbanks, were those the two designated spots that Mr. Fulton was to make contact with Mr. Cox? I don't know what the plan was before he traveled. I know after the fact that he did, in fact, meet with Mr. Cox on at least 2 occasions that week. And one was at Pike's Landing Motel, and the next day was at Far North Tactical or Blondies. Okay. Under whose direction and control was Mr. Fulton at that time? Special Agent Klein, now Supervisory Special Agent Klein, and Special Agent Epsling. Okay, and what was the purpose of Mr. Fulton making contact with Mr. Cox at Pike's Landing? I don't know that they asked him to do what they asked him to do ahead of time. You don't know? No, sir. Are you aware that Mr. Fulton was going to Pike's Landing the day before he had a meeting with at Blondie's the next day? You knew that beforehand? Yes, sir. No, sir, I did not. Did you know that the two meetings places happened one day after the other? I know that after the fact, I believe one happened. I believe Pike's happened on Saturday, and Blondie's Far North Tactical happened on Sunday. Okay, all right, and that was in June of 2010. Yes, sir, I believe that was in June 12th and June the 13th. And do you know if agents accompanied Mr. Fulton when he went to Pike's Landing? I know that Special Agent Klein was out of the state during that time, and I believe that Mr. Special Agent Epling debriefed with telephonic. I don't recall if that meant telephonic. He was in Fairbanks on the phone, or if he was in Anchorage on the phone. I believe that he might have gone to Fairbanks by himself. You are unaware of what the plan they were going to execute with Mr. Fulton at Pike's Landing at that time, correct? Prior to the meeting, I don't know the taskings that they had given him. Okay, and the same thing with Mr. Blondie's the next day, correct? I knew of time about Far North Tactical opening, and I knew that Mr. Cox was going to be there. I don't believe I knew that Anchorage Division was going to have an informant there, so I knew about the event. I found out that Mr. Fulton was there after the fact. What were you doing when this operation was going? What were you tasked to do? On the weekend, yes. I don't believe I was working. Okay, was somebody assisting you while you were gone that weekend? I was in town, I was. Oh, I was there. I didn't have any duties. I was working that week. I wasn't working that weekend at all. I found out sometime either on Monday or Tuesday of that week after Special Agent Klein and Special Agent Eplan debriefed the source. They passed the intelligence over to me and Special Agent Melanie. Well, let's talk about that then after the fact. Did you get information whether or not Mr. Fulton was trying to investigate something through Mr. Cox against the government? No, sir, that was never conveyed to me. Okay. Were you made aware that Mr. Fulton was trying to investigate some sort of conflict through Mr. Cox against the government at Blondie's the next day? I don't understand your question. I will answer based on what I think you just asked me. It was relayed to me that Mr. Cox and Mr. Fulton, Mr. Zerby had some type of conflict that Mr. Fulton may have instigated. But if your question is a plan of instigating something against the government, then I'm not aware of that. You weren't aware of anything of that nature by Mr. Fulton? I'm aware of what his reporting was of the meeting. If you're asking me, was Mr. Fulton tasked to instigate conflict against the government? No, sir, I don't believe that's true. But you weren't involved with that part of the execution of this source that was coming up here to Fairbanks, correct? That's correct, sir. Okay. Now, did the Alaska Peacemakers Militia have an open door policy? In other words, people could join and get commission and so on? Or did they have to go through a rigid screening process? I guess that's the definition of terms. I can tell you what my understanding is that based on conversations and based on the information on their website, if you wanted to join the militia, you would declare your intent, and then you had to schedule for a sit-down face-to-face interview with a command staff member of the militia. And if that command staff member made a recommendation that you could join, then they would welcome you into their militia. Okay, and Mr. Olson was under your direction and control, correct? Yes, sir, he was. Okay, now when you spoke about February the 4th, I know that you have testified that you have stated that Mr. Cox asked Mr. Olson and Mr. Vernon to go to the militia conference, which was the next day in Anchorage on February the 5th, that you believe that Mr. Cox said he wanted grenades and C4 and that Mr. Olson to get that, correct? I asked him that question during the interview post-arrest, if he had sent them to get grenade bodies and C4. The way the conversation actually evolved were that he sent them to get grenades and fuses on the 4th. Mr. Cox mentioned that he had a source locally who could produce C4. February 6th, Mr. Olson came back from the summit or told him that they had a source for C4, and it was on February the 6th that Mr. Cox said he would be interested in finding out how much C4 they could get, whether it was homemade or commercial, what the price was, and what the shelf life of it was. But he did not actually task them to come back from Anchorage with C4. They discussed it, but he didn't send them to get it. Correct, and when he came back, that is, Mr. Olson came back on February the 6th. That was not recorded, right? The encounter with Mr. Cox, right? We do not have any audio that was of that conversation. So if Mr. Olson was not asked to get C4 down in Anchorage, but when he came back here, he asked Mr. Cox saying that he had a source for C4, correct? When Mr. Olson was sent to Anchorage, he was tasked to get grenade bodies and fuses. And then Mr. Vernon, Mr. Cox, Mr. Olson had a discussion about C4. So on February 6th, when he went to meet with Mr. Cox so that Mr. Olson could describe what had happened over the weekend, I tasked him to tell that he could get C4 to see if Mr. Cox was interested in getting it. And he did that. Okay, so you engineered a plan and formed a plan with Mr. Olson to have Mr. Cox interested in C4, which is an explosive, correct? C4 is an explosive. I believe it is a high explosive. I tasked Mr. Olson. He didn't come up with that plan. That was our direction. And we were making available to Mr. Cox a dealer of C4 to see if he was interested in acquiring it and see if he would, in fact, acquire it. Now, on February 12th, well, you listened to the recordings in this case, correct? Yes, sir, I have. Okay, and you listened to the recording of February 12th where this meeting took place in Ken Thessing's bus, correct? Yes, sir, I have. And the discussion of 241 came up at that, as far as you know, at that February 12th meeting, correct? That's the first time I had heard of it, yes, sir. Okay, did Mr. Cox renounce any plan to execute 241? Ms. Lamoureux, objection. On February 12th, hearsay. I'm sorry, I didn't hear what you said. Objection, hearsay. Well, the objection is overruled. Mr. Traverso, after I listened to the audio and after I debriefed the source, my understanding of Mr. Cox's intention on February 12th was that collectively the command staff agreed that they were not at that present time capable of carrying out a C-241 in a sustainable effort, and that if they attempted to do it, that they would be, I think this is a quote, squashed like bugs. So their plan directly from Mr. Cox was that they were supposed to bluff, that it was a possibility, they were to pray, and they were to continue to recruit and equip, and that actually it might be a sustainable effort. What he actually said was bluff, pray, and train, according to what you're talking about. My recollection is that he used the terms bluff, train, and pray. And my recollection is that they also talked about continuing to recruit. And Mr. Cox, it was very clear, well, at least made it very clear to the command staff that he didn't want to do a Rambo. He wanted to do a Gandhi, correct? I remember him making a statement and comparing what the options to each were, doing a Rambo or a Gandhi. And I remember him saying that at the current time that they would do a Gandhi, and I believe he said raise hell and civil disobedience. Okay, was your plan after the meeting with Mr. Olson? What was the plan of the FBI as far as Mr. Cox at that point when you hear that? That was February the 12th, and I think the meeting ended around 1 or 2, maybe around lunchtime. And my plan after I talked to Mr. Olson and found out what went on was to put Mr. Olson back into contact with Mr. Cox and make an offer and tell Mr. Cox that he was willing to go around and do surveillance on any houses for information Mr. Cox might have. So I had Mr. Olson call Mr. Cox to talk about it on the phone, and Mr. Cox wouldn't talk about it on the phone, but told him to come to his house instead. So I talked to Mr. Olson and told him, yes, you need to go up to his house, see what he's talking about, see what information he's willing to provide you. So my plan was to see if Mr. Cox was talking or whether he actually had information to back up his claims. Was Mr. Olson briefed or trying to instigate the militia into violent action? Okay, I'm going to stop on page 81. All right, we're picking up with page 81 on the Sutherland, day 14. Was Mr. Olson briefed on trying to instigate the militia into violent action? No, sir. We throughout this investigation and in our coordination with the troopers, we tried everything we could to mitigate violent actions. We knew that there was a potential for violent confrontation, and we did everything in our power investigatively to mitigate that and to keep that from happening. Mr. Olson was tasked repeatedly by myself to find out what would trigger 241. Mr. Cox had talked about several different scenarios under which it would become likely, and he had also talked about philosophically the fact that it was justified because they were already at war with the system. So there was a gap or a jump between what they philosophically believed they were morally justifiable in doing and what they would actually carry out. So repeatedly I tasked him to find out what will cause this to change from something they were morally justified to doing something that they were actually willing to carry out. But I never told him, go instigate this so that it can happen and we can take action. Well, what was the FBI's plan then, to try to get illegal weapons or illegal weaponry into the hands of Mr. Cox through Mr. Olson? On February 12th, I don't believe that was an investigative strategy. It became an investigative strategy sometime on the week of the 20th when the Anchorage Division had Mr. Fulton call and talk to Mr. Olson and say that he had suppressors available. When Mr. Olson received that information, I then tasked him to pass it on to Mr. Vernon, Mr. Cox, Mr. Barney to see if they were interested in acquiring first suppressors and subsequently down the road also grenades. From August of 2010 until you just stated February of 2010, did you say 22nd? It was 21st or 22nd, 21st. Yes, sir. Okay, until that point, what criminal activity was Mr. Cox involved in that you know of? That is criminal regarding the federal government. The federal government, on November 23rd, there was activity that could be viewed as a conspiracy to kill federal agents, and there was activity that could be interpreted as a solicitation to murder, which is a violation of federal statute, and Mr. Cox had armed himself with Hornet's Nest and 37mm launchers and instructed at least one member of the militia under his command to carry those in an operational environment, which is also a violation of federal law. Who were the federal agents that you state were at risk being killed by Mr. Cox at the KJNP meeting on November 23rd? Our concern was that any plainclothes officer per their operational orders or federal agent who showed up at KJNP and interacted with the defendants in violation of their operational orders that they had been given to them by Mr. Cox, that those federal agents or state law enforcement officers potentially were subject to violent confrontation based on the briefing that had been given to the security detail by Mr. Cox. Was there going to be a group of federal agents going over to KJNP on November 23rd? We specifically put out information and intelligence ahead of time to let local law enforcement, state law enforcement, and other federal law enforcement know that this action potentially could be volatile. And I can only speak for the FBI, and we, myself and my partner, did not have any investigative plan that night to go to KJNP and interact with the security detail. Okay, do politicians have security details? Yes, sir, they do. In fact, some of them do, yes, sir. Didn't Mr. Fulton, who was used as a source, have some business regarding security details? Yes, sir, he did. Okay, in fact, wasn't he involved with Sarah Palin as a security detail for her? I know of at least one politician he was involved with. If he was involved with Miss Palin, I'm not aware of that one. Would that be Ron Paul, the other politician? No, sir, I was referring to Mr. Miller. Oh, Mr. Miller, Joe Miller. Okay, at the time the KJNP occurred, which is November 23rd, 2010, did you believe that Mr. Cox believed in fictional, that he believed in as far as agents coming after him was a complete fiction? I knew that there was no assassination team attempting to kill him. I don't know what he would have believed about other law enforcement officers that went to interact with him during an investigation that might have taken. Now, Mr. Olson didn't go to KJNP, right? No, sir, he didn't. On November 23rd, so how did you know that Mr. Cox was going to be speaking at the radio station on November 23rd? Because Mr. Cox told Mr. Olson on November 19th. That's one way. And I believe they were distributing information around town, that Mr. Cox had some information to share. There was a truth that was going to be revealed. So I believe my recollection is that somebody from the clerk or court's office, I can't recall the name, called and said Mr. Cox was going to be on TV that night as well. So there were no agents that were in jeopardy at KJNP, no federal agents, correct? Our view was that there were potential jeopardy if they showed up to perform their duties, and if they interacted with a security detail, they had been given operational instructions. Were they designed to go there? I can only speak for the FBI. There's a wide variety of federal agents who conduct investigations throughout the Fairbanks area. I know that neither my partner nor myself were going to KJNP that night. Okay, you're not coordinating with any other federal agencies at the time to investigate KJNP, were you? I know that we were briefing the ATF, we were briefing the United States Marshal Service, we were briefing the CID, and we were briefing Air Force OSI. Did they have? Answer the. I'm sorry, I apologize. Go ahead. Yes, sir. The only people I specifically remember sharing the KJNP information were with the Marshals, the ATF, the Alaska State Troopers, and the North Pole Police Department. Okay, you know if any of these entities that you just spoke of were going to KJNP on November 23rd, 2010, correct? If they told me that they were going ahead of time, I would have known. Okay, well, the FBI is not operating in isolation of these other agencies, are they? We do our best to share information back and forth. None of those agencies regularly check in and tell us what their daily activities are. There were occasions throughout the case where I found out that the fact that the ATF in performance of their duties had interacted with individuals in this case, I didn't know ahead of time. We found out afterwards, shared information back and forth, but no, sir, I wouldn't have known ahead of time necessarily, but possibly I could have known if they had contacted me and said, hey, we're going to do this. Okay, it came to your attention later and that a whiteboard had been created, right? It did, sir. And there was instructions to use non-lethal force on that whiteboard, correct? On the whiteboard there was a set of what I would call operational orders. The operational orders culminated in deadly force, and prior to using deadly force, the recipients of that briefing were instructed to use non-lethal means. Post November 23rd, were you aware of, had you been made aware of any agents, federal government agents, that were going to KJNP on the particular day when Mr. Cox was speaking at the radio station? Had you been aware post-event that there were federal agents going over there? No, sir, I've never to this date learned of any federal agents who had a plan to go there that night. Thank you. Now, it came to your attention, you testified extensively regarding a misdemeanor offense that Mr. Cox had regarding a weapon that he had court proceedings in December as well as in February, correct? Yes, sir. Did it ever become a task or a directive to Mr. Olson to have Mr. Cox? Well, let me withdraw that. It came to your attention at some point that there was a falling out between Mr. Cox and Vernon, correct? No, sir. I wouldn't characterize it as that. Okay, you were aware that Mr. Cox was staying at Mr. Vernon's place, correct? Yes, sir, I was. And that he was doing that because he was concerned about the bench warrant and he did not want to go to court, correct? I understand that he was out there because he had chosen not to go to court and was not intending, to go to court. You know about the bench warrant, right? Yes, sir, I did. And you did not decide to arrest Mr. Cox, though, right? That's correct. And neither did the state government, right? That's correct. And there was coordination between the federal government and the state government not to execute the warrant? Yes, sir, there was. Okay, so there was a plan as to that. When Mr. Cox goes to Mr. Vernon's place, what time period is that? I can't be specific because we've never really been able to determine that. I believe when we went out there on February 13th on Sunday evening. But it could have been February 14th, early Monday morning. Okay, and while Mr. Cox went there, at some point during his stay, did an argument ensue between him and Mr. Vernon. The only reporting that we have out of the Vernon's residence was on February the 14th and 15th, and during those 2 days we never documented nor did the source report an argument or disagreement. We did observe through audio and through our human source a heated verbal exchange between Mr. Vernon and Mr. Cox on February 19th at Mr. Barney's house. So on February 19th, there was a disagreement at the goals of the militia, correct? With the goals of the militia, that is, Mr. Vernon had his view, and Mr. Objection, pardon me, I did an objection, overruled. I don't think the question was finished. Traversal, thank you. Mr. Cox and Mr. Vernon had a disagreement as to the objectives of the militia, correct, on February 19th. That's not what my understanding of the disagreement was about. What do you understand the nature of disagreement? My understanding, it was mainly Mr. Vernon who was upset. Mr. Cox did not reciprocate back, and that Mr. Vernon was very upset. He said he was under a lot of stress from things going on in his life, that he was upset how Mr. Cox was conducting himself while he was at Mr. Vernon's house, that Mr. Cox was a fugitive, and that if he was going to do things that would draw law enforcement out to Vernon's house, that he would result in confrontation, and that Mr. Vernon was very upset with Mr. Cox because he didn't feel like he had planned out correctly according to his fugitive status, and that he was just kind of winging it. He was upset that Mr. Cox had got in people's face too much and drawn too much attention. He was upset that Mr. Cox had sent him down to the militia conference as part of an ambush by somebody who was there, and that he needed peace and quiet around his house for the next couple of weeks because there were some things that him and his wife needed to work on without the interruption of visitors. Mr. Vernon, that is, Mr. Vernon was upset with Mr. Cox's paperwork. It's been called paperwork terrorism, I guess, or paper terrorism. Filing paperwork in the Alaska court system, correct? My understanding of what Mr. Vernon was upset about did relate to paperwork, that Karen and Lonnie Vernon had a specific way that they were going to do their paperwork under the system that they thought was appropriate, and Mr. Cox was talking to members of the National Assembly Post movement and taking direction and instructions from them. Mr. Vernon did not agree with that system of filing paperwork and thought that it did not move the court per se, or it wasn't received by the court, and so he was basically spinning his wheels by following their direction instead of the system that Lonnie and Karen were using. They didn't see eye to eye at some point. Mr. Cox and his family, that is, the wife Marty and his son Seth and the newborn, have to move from there and move to the Barney residence, correct? That's, yes sir, correct. Okay, now as part of you were conducting surveillance, Mr. Cox, during you conducting, let me ask the question this way. Were you conducting surveillance of Mr. Cox in summer of 2010? The only surveillance we conducted was in the month of August, and we did several drive-by surveillance of his residence. I believe we took several photographs of his residence. We took several aerial photographs of his residence in August, and I don't believe there was any other surveillance other than that. Did you at one point believe that there was an IED in his yard or side near the sidewalk of his house? We observed what appeared to be some type of tank, acetylene tank, that looked like it had been buried or positioned in the yard along the sidewalk, so we took some photographs. We had a bomb technician go by the residence and look at it to try to determine what it was, and we did some follow-up and some discussion to determine what exactly the device was. It looked sort of out of order. And at some point you conclude, or somebody concludes within your agency, there was no bomb, no IED there, correct? My understanding of the conclusion was that it was a tank of some sort, but that it was positioned, and the way it looked at it, it didn't look like it had been set out there in an attempt to be an IED, whether it was a diversion, whether it was something that's just got left there. I didn't look like any type of functional device. You're aware that Mr. Cox had a business, landscaping business and construction business? Yes, sir, I was. Okay, now when Mr. Cox goes to Barney's house, which is around February 19th, or I guess when it's right on February 19th, were you made aware that Mr. Cox's plan were as far as either staying in Alaska or leaving Alaska? I recall on February 12th and February 19th that the command staff had a variety of discussions about whether Mr. Cox should stay or whether Mr. Cox should go. And if he was going to go, where he should go and how she should go. And I remember the discussions ranged from, on one end was staying and making one Barney's cabins usable and livable, and that he could stay out there for a time. Mr. Cox discussed the fact that he owned a sailboat down in Sitka, and there was only potential for him to get to a boat and Zerby a plane, and there was potential for Les Zerby to fly him. And then on the February 19th, one of the trips out to Mr. Vernon's house was to get Mr. Cox's possession. Mr. Cox and Mr. Olson discussed a plan where a trucker could get Mr. Cox and his family in a truck and drive them out of through Canada to the lower 48. So the plan was to stay at Barney residence, was to be short in nature, and was to leave in very short order through this trucker. There was an evolution of sorts of the plan, and I believe that one they finally settled on was that sometime in early March they would utilize a trucker. Mr. Olson had reference to get Mr. Cox's possessions and his family down to Montana. But Mr. Cox was going to pack up his stuff, put it in the trailer, take off with his family. But you're saying that, let me withdraw that. You're saying that Mr. Cox was going to stay in North Pole, Alaska, or he was going to, was that the plan to stay there for a short while? Or the plan was to stay for a long period of time and then leave? Once again, there was an evolution of plans. Early on, when they were staying at Coleman Barney's house, they were talking about various people who had cabins available where they could stay. Mr. Olson offered up that he knew someone with a cabin. Mr. Barney said that he could make a cabin usable. My understanding all along was that the stay at the Barney's residence was just somewhat transient, kind of as a place to just stay until Mr. Cox could get out of the state of Alaska. But the trucker who we call the virtual Han Solo, I guess is his name, that he was labeled was through Mr. Olson. Well, Mr. Olson was tasked, was he not, to try to delay Mr. Cox's departure through statements like, well, Han Solo truck broke down in the lower 48, or he's going to be up here, but he's got to do this and he's got to do, there was a series of delays, were there not, and on the part of that were not true, but there were delays on the part of Han Solo that Mr. Olson conveyed to Mr. Cox. Yes, sir, that's true. Okay, and the purpose of that was to delay Mr. Cox's departure, so that would not happen. So what would happen? So what would happen instead? We knew that we were going to be arresting Mr. Cox and Mr. Vernon and Mr. Barney, and we knew that we had to move significant investigative resources to Alaska to supplement what we had there. So we were creating a tactical plan to both effect an arrest and a plan that would allow us to be able to safely conduct all of the searches, which required us to move special agent bomb technicians resources from around the country up here. So Mr. Olson was tasked to delay Mr. Cox when he asked about when the truck was coming, because he had set date in early March, and we intended to effect those arrests. So he was tasked several times, maybe probably 4 or 5 as a fair estimate, to tell Mr. Cox certain delays that had happened and would prevent Mr. Cox from being able to get in the truck and route out of Alaska. Now, you said that you were going to engage in arrest of Mr. Cox, but they weren't going to be arrested based on the bench warrant. They weren't going to be arrested based on the March 10th event, which we have called the takedown, right? The transfer of weapons, illegal weapons that you and your agency attempted to do with Mr. Cox and Mr. Barney. No, sir, that's not correct. Okay, now, they were going to be arrested on the state arrest warrants based on the conspiracy that was alleged regarding the 241 plan, and the FBI was asked to effect the arrest based on those state warrants. Then, as part of the takedown scenario, they were also going to be offered an opportunity to demonstrate whether they wanted to be acquired suppressed weapons and grenades at the same time. Okay, but the federal government had nothing to arrest Mr. Cox on that point other than the fact that there was a state warrant that you could have actually acted on if you wanted to, right? No, sir, I disagree with that statement. Okay, there was a state warrant that you did not execute on, right? That's correct. Okay, Traverso, can I have a moment, Your Honor? Thank you. Yeah, and we're going to break the morning up a little here. I suggest 10 minutes last time, and it was like 20. So let's say now we're going to reconvene at 10 after 11 or else. Okay. All right. This matter stands in recess. All rise. This dishonorable court is again in session. Please be seated. Okay, you can bring the jury in. Mr. Traverso, you may continue. Thank you. On prior to February 12th, 2011, did you discover a text, email, or any other information that discussed 241? We understood the concept before hearing some speeches Mr. Cox had made, but we never saw anything that referred to it or designated or named it as Operation 241 until February 12th. Okay, and the only time 241 ever came up is when Mr. Olson was president and Mr. Cox, other members of the militia. I can't answer that. I don't know what conversations they had outside of his presence. Okay, did Mr. Olson raise 241 on February 6th when he came back from Anchorage? Mr. Olson had never heard about 241 until February 12th when Mr. Cox introduced it at the rest of the command staff. Okay, now you have testified regarding Michael Anderson's connection to Mr. Cox. He wasn't a member of the militia, right? There's evidence both for and against that. Mr. Anderson said he didn't consider himself part of the militia. Mr. Cox considered him a resource of the militia. And then the Alaska Peacemakers militia call-out list, Mr. Anderson is listed as one of the members. So, okay, I guess I don't know, sir. Okay, did Mr. Olson ever convey to you that Mr. Anderson was a member of the militia, Alaska Peacemakers militia, through his activity as an informant? What Mr. Olson conveyed to me were his discussions with Schaefer Cox, and Mr. Cox described Anderson to Olson as someone who did not want to join the militia and subject themselves to a command structure, uniform structure. There was more of a lone wolf anarchist. He was more of a lone wolf anarchist. Okay, and Mr. Cox considered Mr. Anderson's a resource to gather up information you stated earlier on troopers, judges, but that he was information based on a lot of people, correct? What it was originally described as the first time we heard about it was February 12th. Mr. Cox described it, I believe, in that conversation as the database of everyone, but then specifically cops and judges. When we found it to be after the investigation included law enforcement officers, non-law enforcement government employees, state law enforcement employees, and at least one member of OCS. Okay, Mr. Anderson, it came to your attention, destroyed that database, correct? My knowledge based on interviews and his testimony is that the part of the database or list that was contained on a computer was destroyed, physically destroyed, software destroyed by Mr. Anderson. Okay, and when Mr. Cox was trying to leave the state through the virtual trucker, as we call him, Han Solo, Did it ever come to your attention that Mr. Cox was not buying, but excuse me, taking care of his bills at his house and other personal things before he left? My recollection is that he gave instructions to Joe Nichols to manage his affairs, and he gave specific instructions about collecting bills or invoices from customers, that he instructed Mr. Nichols to collect rent from the tenants, and that there were some bills he was instructed to pay and some credit cards and his mortgage that he was instructed not to pay. So basically, Mr. Cox was trying to complete his affairs so that he could leave. Lamoureux objection. Well, the objection is sustained. Okay. But he was taking Joe, became aware that Mr. Olson was, through Mr. Cox, was to contact Joe Nichols to get certain things taken care of, correct? All right, now through the course of your investigation in this case and after items had been seized from the trailer, did it ever come to your attention that there were many items in the trailer wrapped in bubble wrap? Yes, sir, I'm sorry. Yes, sir, I wasn't at the trailer search. The results of the search were conveyed to me, and I saw photographs after the fact, and I saw a mixture of items that looked like packed for travel. Some of them were boxed up, some of them were not, and there were a variety of items that were wrapped in some type of shrink wrapping. Okay, thank you. When the meeting occurred on February 12th at Ken Thessing's bus, did the February 13th you communicate with other members of the Joint Terrorism Task Force that there were no immediate threats on law enforcement? I remember communicating that night with the Alaska State Troopers who had been mentioned specifically by Mr. Cox, and his addresses had given to Mr. Olson to go surveil. And I either communicated that night or the next day about the plan, the 2-for-1 plan, but it had not been authorized to put into motion, and that it was potential liability and not an imminent one. There was some discussions that it was Cox just generating ideas about stuff, correct? I know that was one of the goals of our investigation, to find out that was this something that Mr. Cox is talking about as a philosophical and moral position that he is somehow entitled to, or is this something operationally that he is going to put into motion? Okay, thank you. Okay, I'm going to stop here at page 101. Okay, picking up at 101 here. Mr. Cox's cell phone was, would you agree, perhaps a huge amount of information on it, correct? Yes, sir, I think that's fair. Okay, in fact, you noted that in one of your emails to other agents of the Joint Terrorism Task Force that there was a wealth of information on the cell phone. I don't disagree with that. I don't remember the specific email, but I agree there was a lot of information on there. And would you say that he had perhaps on his contact list as many as 500, 600 people? I believe it was 594, yes sir. 594. And they covered a whole spectrum of people. Politicians, law enforcement, friends, community members, religious members of the community, other people interested in the militia movement. Just a wide range of contacts, agree? I will agree with you that I know there were militia members in there, people I knew to be as family members, people that were identified in the contacts as religious individuals, politicians, persons associated with the military and the courts, and then obviously there were several hundred. I had no idea who they were. When you learned that Mr. Cox wanted to leave the state, was it your plan at that point, or the FBI plan, to try to get illegal weapons in his possession before that could happen? We planned to arrest him. We planned to set the date and location of the arrest at a place of our choosing, and we planned also to provide suppressed weapons and grenades to the defendants to see if they were willing or interested in obtaining them. Did you ever instruct Mr. Olson to make sure that he got the guns and the grenades in his hands, that is, the hands of Mr. Cox and Mr. Barney? I don't believe I ever tasked him to make sure to put them in their hands. I remember having discussions about when the arrest would take place, when the takedown itself would be put into motion, and that we were going to try to carry it out long enough to see if they were interested in receiving them, in examining them. I don't recall a specific tasking where I said, make sure you get this in their hand. I tasked him to pick them up from Mr. Fulton, to take them to the arrest site, to tell them what they got, and then to give a gun or a gun case to each one of the defendants to examine, and to take the grenades out and to pass the grenades out for them to be examined as well. Okay, well, in order to establish possession in their hands, you need to get it in their hands, correct? My recollection is that we were investigating a conspiracy, and that we were providing inert devices, and that we were making them available for examination to see if they were willing to acquire them. Were you with Mr. Olson when he got the items that you speak of from Mr. Fulton on March 10th? I didn't go with him to Mr. Fulton's room. We were nearby in a parking lot and observed him go into the motel and come out with the items. Okay, these items came from Mr. Fulton, not from the FBI. On that day, they were handed to Mr. Olson by Mr. Fulton. They originated from the FBI Weapons Division. And that interaction was not recorded, correct? You also stated that Mr. Cox, let me ask you this. When you are addressing Mr. Cox in your interview of him, you talk about grenades. You don't talk about grenade bodies, do you? I remember my questions. I can specifically remember using the word grenades, and I remember one of his answers that he describes them as maybe paperweight grenades or dummy grenades, but I think he said paperweight. But I don't ever specifically remember asking him about grenade bodies, singular as opposed to grenades. Okay, were you, if I can go back a little bit on a different theme, but a similar date that were discussed before when Mr. Fulton came up to Fairbanks and when, after going to Fat Pikes, he went to Blondie's, or that is, Far North Tactical Shop. Were you aware whether or not the events that were taking place there at Blondie's were sponsored by the Interior Alaska Conservative Coalition? I know that Maria had some involvement with that event. And who is Maria? Just so the jury can know. My understanding is that she was someone in leadership position with the IACC. I'm not sure which office she held, but she held a leadership position. I know that she had involvement with that meeting. I don't believe I ever knew that, who was sponsoring it. I thought it was a grand opening for Far North Tactical. Do you know whether Michael Anderson went to the meetings of the Interior Alaska Conservative Coalition? Generally speaking, yes. I know at least on one occasion, February 12th, there was a meeting, I believe at 7 o'clock that night, that Mr. Cox was going to and expected to see Mike Anderson because he told Mr. Olson that he would give him a message. So I inferred from that I recall another meeting. I believe the exhibit we've seen of the TSA employees and the state troopers' names and sketch of a map that I recall that was done at IACC meeting where Mr. Anderson and Mr. Cox were both present. So from those two incidents, I infer that he at least sporadically attended. Did you write a report about that? Which one? About the particular meeting of the IACC where Mr. Cox and Mr. Anderson were there and there was a drawing being done at that time? I wasn't at that meeting, no sir. Oh, do you have any kind of intelligence regarding that? Any information that you received from other people in the community regarding that particular meeting? The only information I'm aware of from that meeting is Mr. Anderson's descriptive of meeting Mr. Cox at that meeting and the corroborative documents that were found in Mr. Anderson's house that corroborated his statement about, him drawing a sketch of the courthouse and Mr. Cox giving him several names for him to add to the database or his list. Okay, now have you had any meetings with Mr. Gibson, who you testified earlier about? Have you had any meetings with him? I interviewed him first in April of 2011 in Fairbanks was the first time I had met him, and then I met him or spoke to him one time in April of 2012 at the U.S. Attorney's office in Anchorage. And what happened? And what prompted you to talk to Mr. Gibson? The first time, yes. We interviewed him to determine what his involvement was. Mr. Cox had alluded to the fact that he had a member of the United States Army who was a military policeman who could provide him information related to anti-terrorism briefings that Mr. Gibson attended. And so we interviewed Mr. Gibson to find out from him what his involvement was with Mr. Cox and what information, if any, had been passed over to Mr. Cox. Okay, were you aware Mr. Cox and others going to various federal agencies to talk about their gun rights? Yes, sir, I'm aware of that. Okay, you were aware of Mr. Cox's involvement in the Second Amendment Task Force, correct? Yes, sir, I am. And the Liberty Bell, yes, sir. And the Alaska Peacemakers Militia, yes, sir. And also the Alaska Assembly Post, yes, sir. Okay, when Mr. Cox and others went to the various federal agencies, were you aware of Mr. Cox going to an ATF office in Fairbanks and speaking with an agent named Eric Cahoon? I am aware of that now. I wasn't at the time. Okay, and they discussed what their gun rights were. Lamoureux Objection Foundation. I'm sorry, objection what? Foundation? Well, and hearsay. Yes, the objection is sustained. Okay. Did it come to your attention that one of the people that Mr. Cox spoke to was Steve Cooper? Yes, sir. That is Steve Cooper, a United States attorney? My understanding, yes, sir, the Assistant United States Attorney stationed in Fairbanks, Stephen Cooper. Okay, thank you. Did you ever interview Mr. Cooper? I did not know, sir. Okay, when you discussed with Mr. Cox, well, you mentioned that Mr. Cox wanted fragmentation grenades. You're talking about full-blown grenades ready to blow up, right? That was, you just light it up and boom? My understanding was he was expecting to receive 8-second authentic grenades. Okay, Traverso, I have no further questions. The court, Mr. Dooley, Mr. Sutherland, hello, sir. 241 at Ken Thessing's bus. Everyone at the bus rejected the idea of 241 except J.R. Olson, correct? Objection, hearsay. No, I think he may answer it. No, sir, I believe that they rejected the idea that they were capable of a sustained 241. They didn't reject the idea philosophically that it was wrong. All right, you lived in the South? Yes, sir, I have. You heard the South will rise again? I've heard that saying, and some are serious about it. There are some who take it more seriously than others. At Ken Thessing's bus, J.R. Olson said, "How about 5 for 1, correct?" Yes, sir, he did. Now, what did you do about that, about Olson saying such a thing? At some point in the next couple of days, I spoke to him when I was tasking him ahead of time and told him that he needed to be careful to receive information. It was imperative that he blended in and that he was part of a group and wasn't ferreted out as a human source for the FBI, but that he needed to be careful and didn't push too hard in certain things, and that he let the information come to him. And the reason you were talking to him about that was he appeared to be pushing too hard, correct? I recall there were various people listening to the audio besides myself, and that collectively we talked about it and agreed he needed to be reminded that he could not get too caught up in a situation and be too forward in bringing things up, that he was to respond to my taskings, and if I told him to talk about something that he should, but needed to be careful, and he wasn't the one who was pushing it. Each time you have you listened to all the tapes? I have listened to all the consensual monitorings. We have a lot of audio information from other speeches from an open source. I don't think that I have listened to all of those through, but all of the consensual monitorings I have, yes sir. And that would be the J.R. Olson tapes? Yes sir. J.R. Olson is the person who raises 2 for 1 at the Ken Thessing bus and the meeting of subsequent conversations, correct? I know there are numerous conversations when he brings it up in my direction. I don't think I can conclusively say that every time it's mentioned that he is the one who brings it up, but there are certainly numerous times when he brings it up in my direction. At your direction brings up 2 for 1, we got to get a plan, correct? Are you referring to an exact quote? No, just rough. He was tasked with finding out, is there a plan? Should Mr. Cox be arrested? What will our response be? Should somebody else be arrested? What will our response be? And is 2 for 1 something that is merely something that Mr. Cox has raised as a philosophical position and a deterrent to law enforcement? Or is this something that actually would be carried out at the direction of Mr. Cox? You heard on some of the consensual tapes of J.R. Olson people joking about the rumor of 8 hand grenades stolen from Fort Wainwright. Correct? Yes, sir, I did. And joking somehow that these guys had those 8 hand grenades, correct? Yes, sir, I did. And I want to just double check something you had said with Mr. Cox in your interrogation of interview with him. Maybe I misheard, but you can confirm it. You told Mr. Cox that you heard Coleman Barney talk about an ammo can with 8 hand grenades in it. Do you recall that? That was actually your tape, not your direct testimony exactly. I recall in the interview that Mr. Cox and I had a back and forth when I was discussing grenades, and I referenced at a time that I heard them joking about the fact that Mr. Cox had somehow gotten onto a military installation and stolen Department of Defense grenades, and it was also compounded with the question about the Bradway Tracy Road area, and I told him that I had heard on the tape one of the members, and I was referring to Mr. Olson moving an ammo can with grenades, and if I referenced Mr. Barney, I was referencing the fact that I heard Mr. Barney joke about the grenades stolen from Fort Wainwright and not Mr. Barney with grenades at Tracy Avenue. All right, Olson isn't clearly on the tape saying, hey, 8 hand grenades at the Bradway tape. That's correct, sir. You also asked Mr. Cox a question about maybe I have it wrong, did not know whether he knew about a hornet's nest and steam ball was. And I was saying steam ball, right? Sting ball. Yes, sir. Sting, S-T-I-N-G? Correct. Okay, I thought it was a steam ball. Sorry, what is a sting ball? A sting ball grenade is the equivalent of a hornet's nest, but it's hand-thrown instead of launched. A 37mm flare gun. It looks somewhat like a grenade. It has a pin and a spoon. You pull the pin and you deploy it into a room, and after an explosion it expels rubber balls in all directions, similar to a hornet's nest. And in fact, the ALS company makes those things, correct? I don't know that for sure, but it certainly wouldn't surprise me. It's the same type of family of products as they produce. Now, you all had a number of searches when I think you'll agree were thorough searches, correct? I believe they were thorough, yes sir. And you never found an ammo can with 8 real hand grenades in it. That's correct. And you never found 8 hand grenades that were real hand grenades anywhere. We never found 8 live hand grenades. No, we didn't. Okay. You earlier testified about a meeting between Lonnie Vernon, Schaefer Cox, and J.R. Olson prior to J.R. Olson and Lonnie Vernon going down to Anchorage to the Millennium Hotel. Do you recall that? Yes, sir, I do. Coleman Barney was not present at that meeting, to your knowledge. He was not present. Earlier, we had a tape in which Olson stated to the Vernons talking about silencers, grenades, and like, there's one for me, one for Schaefer, one for you. Do you recall that? I do earlier, yes, sir. But there wasn't one for Coleman, at least in that little statement. He didn't reference one for Mr. Barney in that conversation. No, sir. All right. To your knowledge, Bill Fulton never had a contact with Coleman Barney. I don't believe Mr. Fulton knows who Mr. Barney is. Now, it's official position on the U.S. government that federal agents shouldn't murder people, right? It's the official position of the U.S. government that federal agents shouldn't murder people, right? Objection! Correct? He may answer. Under the definition of unjustified killing, correct. We're not allowed to unjustifiably kill anybody. Kill anyone. Right. If you announce yourself to someone so you're under arrest, that sort of thing is proper procedure, correct, if they need arresting? There are certain circumstances where we identify ourselves and announce to someone that they're under arrest. That's not always how we conduct business, all right? But you don't, as a matter of policy, simply open fire on people, correct? Objection, he may answer it. We follow our deadly force policy, and we do not use deadly force unless it's justifiable under our policy. Have you studied Ruby Ridge at all in your training? Objection, relevance. I think that's a fair objection. Mr. Dooley, you were mentioning a .30 caliber weapon that was hand cranked. That's not charged with having that as an illegal weapon, correct? That's correct, sir. There's only one machine gun in this whole case, correct, for which they're charged. There's only been entered into evidence that in this case one weapon that I would found by a laboratory to be a machine gun. That's a correct statement. All right. You were asking Schaefer Cox during the interview, who is Richard Olson, correct? Yes, sir, that is. And you told him he has the registered owner of the trailer, correct? Yes, sir, I did. And you were asking him who owns the trailer, right? Yes, sir, I was. Were you his responses? Are you saying he was lying to you in his response? The way I asked the questions at the beginning, I thought were confusing to him. Once I realized that he did not genuinely know who Mr. Olson was, and I realized that he might not have been aware of the transaction Mr. Barney had to acquire the trailer, so I reset and I stripped out the information about Mr. Olson and just started back with, whose trailer was it? Where did the trailer go? Whose trailer did you believe it was? So the questions at the beginning of the conversation I would not characterize as lying because I genuinely don't think he knew who Mr. Olson was. I believe he continued to try to use that as a crutch to confuse his answer, and I believe at the end that he was not answering truthfully with regard to his understanding of who the trailer belonged to and where it was. Who the trailer belonged to, but you work for the Federal Bureau of Investigation. You have the power of the United States government and the state to tell you who owned the trailer, but I gather you didn't really know who owned the trailer, correct? We believe Mr. Barney owned the trailer from the investigation, and because of the fact that it had been in his possession, we didn't find out that Mr. Barney had followed the steps to register it prior to the takedown, and that it was actually still in the name of Mr. Olson. It was our belief that functionally Mr. Barney owned the trailer and was using it. All right, but it'd be unfair to accuse you fellows of lying, correct? Objection, argumentative, sustained. Mr. Dooley, were you either at the takedown? Were you either of the takedowns on March 10th? I wasn't there as the arrest happened. I was staged about 500 yards away and arrived shortly after the arrest had occurred. And you understand these fellows didn't pull their guns on anybody or throw grenades at them, correct? Yes, sir, I understand that. I have no further questions, thank you. I think we still got 10 minutes of morning. So good morning, Special Agent Sutherland. Good morning, Miss Hayden. I think I'd like to talk to you about the meeting at Coleman Barney's house on February 19th. You spoke a little bit about that during your testimony, and that would be February 19th of 2011, and I'm sure you have. We've heard a recording of a little bit of that something. Is that correct? Yes, ma'am. And that was at 2402, the government's exhibit. That meeting was actually listed a few hours. Am I correct? There was several meetings throughout the day, and I believe that the total time of all the meetings was close to 7 hours, which included the trip to Mr. Vernon's and back, and then another conversation with Mr. Olson, Mr. Barney, and Mr. Cox. So what I would characterize as the morning meeting, the first meeting, I think it lasted close to 3 hours, if I recall correctly. And you described your testimony that there was a heated conversation between Mr. Vernon and Mr. Cox. I think I characterized it fairly one way. Mr. Vernon was pretty heated at Mr. Cox, and I think I said Mr. Cox didn't reciprocate back. That's fair. That's a fair characterization. I agree with that. And we heard just a portion of Mr. Vernon's heated discussion, or heated rant, if you will. It's just a portion, yes ma'am. Okay, it lasted longer than what we've heard here in court. It did. Now, one of the things that Lonnie Vernon was concerned about was Mr. Cox taking care of his state case. Is that correct? I think he was upset about the way Mr. Cox had chosen to handle it. They were in some agreement about how he was handling it because Mr. Vernon went to the common law trial. I think he was more upset about how he characterized Mr. Cox, kind of putting it in their face. Well, didn't he tell Mr. Cox that you should have? I wouldn't use his exact words, but you should have bailed it out and gotten it done with. I wouldn't disagree with that, but I don't remember it specifically. Okay, and he was concerned with that Mr. Cox was in his mind acting in an inappropriate way by kind of being public with the fact that he didn't show up. Objection, hearsay overruled. Miss Hayden, I believe that's kind of what I was describing as putting in their face or being very public. Yes, ma'am. He was out in Mr. Vernon's yard making noise. Yes, ma'am. Mr. Vernon didn't care for that. That was one of the things he was upset about. Using Mr. Vernon's telephone, he didn't care for that, correct? Okay, now one of the things that Mr. Vernon expressed that we heard in 2402 was that he was preoccupied with things that he and his wife needed to get done. Is that correct? Yes, ma'am, that is correct. Okay, and he was under a lot of pressure. Yes, ma'am. Do you recall him saying that? I do recall him saying that. Okay, and I believe you testified about Mr. Vernon's and Mr. Cox's belief, how to put this, their use of the court system differed. I believe I said that they had different understandings of how they should file their paperwork. I would characterize it as both a sovereign type of paperwork, and Mr. and Miss Vernon's had a particular mindset and the way of doing business and using certain vernacular and forms, and it differed with the advice that Mr. Cox had been getting from the Assembly Post, and Mr. Vernon was upset about Mr. Cox's deviation from what he thought was appropriate paperwork and a better way to do it. Well, isn't it true at this time that Mr. Vernon had a civil case going on? Yes, I believe it was a civil case. Yes, ma'am. Okay, and it was a civil case in federal court. Yes, ma'am. And you've probably reviewed that, haven't you? Yes, ma'am, I have. I'm going to stop here at page 121. All right, let's continue with page 121. Okay, and isn't it true that he was actually following rules of civil procedure in his following? Objection, Lamoureux. The objection is sustained. Have you reviewed that civil suit, Ms. Lamoureux? Objection, relevance, court overruled. Ms. Hayden. I have reviewed paperwork that the Vernons filed with the court, and I have reviewed some of the court's rulings. I think that I've probably seen less than 50% of it, but I have a fairly accurate understanding of what's going on back and forth. And in some of the recordings that you reviewed, the recordings that J.R. Olson made, do you recall hearing Mr. Vernon talk about the deadlines set in that civil suit? Ms. Lamoureux, objection, hearsay, court overruled. Ms. Hayden, yes ma'am, I remember several specific dates that Mr. Vernon referenced and described as deadlines of some kind, and those deadlines would be set by a judge. I'm assuming they had something to do with the filing. Deadlines that the court had set, yes ma'am, or would be set by procedural rules. That's my understanding, yes ma'am. And he was concerned about meeting those deadlines. My recollection specifically is that they had a filing due on March the 7th to the Ninth Circuit, and they were seeking to use the Ninth Circuit to overrule the decision that had been made at district court, and that they had some type of confines about getting their response in by the 7th, and that he was very concerned and stressed about getting that done and out to the 9th. So I'll put this question to you again. Isn't it fair to say that he's trying to follow civil procedures of court, the rules? Objection, sustained. Now, during this heated rant with Mr. Vernon had with Mr. Cox, isn't it true that he said, I'm blowing up because I've had enough of this? I believe I remember that exact statement, yes ma'am. I'm not standing up for this shit anymore. I remember him saying something along those lines, yes ma'am. Okay, now the civil suit that Mr. Vernon had, that was with the IRS, isn't that correct? Objection, relevance, overruled, yes ma'am, that's my understanding. And it was a civil matter. In other words, it wasn't a criminal matter, it was civil. I can only tell you my understanding is that it arose out of a tax case, and that it was with the IRS, and that the civil matter was some type of follow-up to the tax case, is my understanding. Now, after the conversation on the 19th, as far as, those would be monitored conversations, I guess, with Mr. Olson, and Mr. Olson reporting back to you, Mr. Vernon had further conversations with Mr. Cox. No, ma'am, I don't agree with that. Do you have monitored conversations between Mr. Vernon and Mr. Cox during that time period? Yes, ma'am. What dates? The venting of the rant disagreement occurred on the morning of the 19th, and Mr. Cox agreed to move out of Vernon's home and move into Barney's residence, and Mr. Olson and Mr. Cox left the meeting and went out to Vernon's residence to begin picking up Mr. Cox's family, their possessions, and the Vernons left the Barney's residence and went into town to run some errands, and later that afternoon they met back up at Vernon's house, and Mr. Cox was still there, and Mr. Cox and Mr. Vernon had a conversation basically saying, hey, no hard feelings, essentially. I'm not upset at you, I'm just under a lot of stress. And Mr. Cox told Mr. Vernon, don't worry about it, I know you're under stress. I'll just go stay at Barney's for a while. That was the same day, the day of the 19th. It was, yes ma'am. It was the afternoon following the morning disagreement, the morning rant, yes ma'am. And after that, as far as he had no further conversations with Mr. Cox. I don't have any recordings. There are conversations that alluded to by Mr. Vernon, but the government does not have any recordings of those. So you have no evidence of any further conversations? We don't have the conversation. We have people saying that they talked. Who? We have, Mr. Vernon saying, I believe he said he talked to Coleman Barney. To Mr. Barney, yes ma'am. Correct, yes ma'am. But not Mr. Cox. I can't think of an instance after February 19th where I'm aware that they talked. Thank you, sir. That's all I have. Miss Lamoureux, it's good. It's now good afternoon. It's now good afternoon. This is redirect by Lamoureux. Mr. Traverso asked you some questions about the investigation early on in the investigation about your review and whether you were aware of the speeches that Mr. Cox gave in Montana. Do you remember that? Yes, ma'am, I do. And he referred specifically to a speech called The Solution. Yes, ma'am, he did. And after you watched that recording of Mr. Cox, The Solution speech, yes, ma'am, I have. And how were you able to watch that? A variety of individuals, I think I testified in court, the Solution speech was consistent themed speech that was given multiple times, and as Mr. Cox would give it in Montana, individuals who attended it would document it with video cameras, audio, and then a number of those people posted it online and identified it as Schaefer Cox, the Solution speech. And specifically, it posted several times at YouTube, so we were able to go to YouTube after we were made aware of it and watch the speech. And have you had an understanding of when Mr. Cox gave that speech down in Montana? I know specifically one time that he gave the Solution speech in Hamilton, Montana, and I believe that it was in January of 2010. Have you had an opportunity to review those recordings and the clips were made from those? We've made from those manuscripts recording the clips we've made from those recordings. Yes, ma'am, I have. We have identified at Government Exhibit 921 as a clip from that YouTube. Have you watched that before? Yes, ma'am, I have. The government offers 921. Is that what speech is it? The Solution? Okay. It's part of the no objection. It's a clip from it. No objection, no objection, no objection. 921 may be admitted. If we could have the lights, Madam Clerk, we don't have a transcript. It's just going to be video, audio, video. Was one of the recordings that you reviewed early on in your investigation? Yes, ma'am. That's part of what, on one of the recordings, you also referred to one that you called Schaefer Cox, talking about being on the edge of having blood in the streets in Fairbanks. That's my recollection of a speech that he made, was entitled The Trouble in Fairbanks. I believe it was a speech he gave in April of 2010 and on YouTube. It was entitled Trouble in Fairbanks. And was that also in Montana? Yes, ma'am, it was. And have you had an opportunity to review clips that we selected in this case, portions from that speech that Schaefer Cox gave down in Montana? Yes, ma'am, I have reviewed those. Ms. Lamoureux, the government offers two clips identified as Exhibits 92301 and 92302. No objection. I'm sorry, the numbers again. 923, it's Exhibits 923, and there's two clips to it. 923 may be admitted, or 923, those two clips, are they identified as sub-numbers? It's just 923. All right, 923 is an evidence. Video and audio, Ms. Lamoureux. Video recording, end of video. Is there another recording that you reviewed during the course of this investigation? Yes, ma'am, it is. If we could have the lights, Madam Clerk. Now, people have the First Amendment rights, right? Absolutely, they do. Is that something you have took into consideration throughout this investigation? One of the things I talked about, I believe it was yesterday, was when we conduct certain investigations for certain allegations, we have different internal constraints. And one of those constraints is something involved what we have designated as a sensitive investigation matter, or SIM. And those SIMs are specifically investigations where people are exercising a First or Second Amendment right, or the investigation is into any one of those variety of institutions that are protected by speech or assembly, and we have internal hurdles that we have to overcome to make sure that the allegations being made are not just somebody exercising a right guaranteed to them and provided to them by the Constitution, but that they go beyond those rights and participate in criminal activity. So throughout this case, because Mr. Cox was involved with numerous organizations that were protected by the First and Second Amendment, it was of great concern to us that we not infringe on those rights. That's a bunch of crap. But we try to isolate out the criminal activity and separate it from what was protected by the First and Second Amendment. And you're referring to, these are Schaefer Cox's words in those speeches? Yes, ma'am, they are. Were you investigating the Alaska Peacemakers militia? No, we never. We have a mechanism within the FBI to investigate a group. This particular investigation started as an investigation of Schaefer Cox, and along the investigation timeline, it transitioned into where there was an investigation of Lonnie Vernon and of Coleman Barney. On those speeches there, was Mr. Olson present for those speeches? No, ma'am, he wasn't. What about Mr. Fulton? No, ma'am, he was not. You were asked some questions about terrorism statutes. Remember when Mr. Traverso was asking you about that? Yes, ma'am, I do. Are you familiar with the counts that were charged against the defendants in this case? Yes, ma'am, I am. And are there any defendants charged under those statutes? No, under the terrorism statutes, no, ma'am. They're not being accused of advocating violence or overthrow of the government? No, ma'am, they're not. You were asked some questions about Mr. Fulton's role in June of 2010 up in Fairbanks. Yes, ma'am. At that time, was Mr. Olson being tasked as an informant in Fairbanks? He was tasked as an informant in Fairbanks, but not for this investigation. That was June 12th and 13th. Mr. Olson did not receive his first tasking in this investigation, specifically a tasking with regard to Mr. Cox until either the last week of June or the first week of July. And so was Mr. Olson present at the meeting that weekend of June the 12th or 13th in 2010? No, ma'am, he was not. Was Mr. Fulton tasked at all related to the KJNP event? I'm not even sure that Mr. Fulton was aware of that, but he had no taskings from the FBI with regard to KJNP. What about in December of 2010 related to the Schaefer Cox Estate court hearing dates? Was Mr. Fulton tasked at all related to those events? No, ma'am, he was not. Was Mr. Fulton present at the common law jury trial at Denny's? No, ma'am, he was not. Was he present at the meeting at Ken Thessing's house on February 12, 2011? No, ma'am, he was not. And your understanding of Mr. Fulton's last in-person contact with any of the defendants occurred when? February 5th, 2011, when he was in person with Lonnie Vernon in Anchorage. Going back to KJNP night, somebody could have made an emergency call that night, right? And yes, that's absolutely possible that anyone could have called law enforcement that night. Is that part of what you contacted the other law enforcement agencies? That's specifically one of the reasons why, so that if they were called to respond, they would know that a security detail of the militia was active and that they were armed. You were asked some questions by Mr. Dooley about the FBI's use of force. Can you provide the jury with a summary of the training that you received regarding the use of force? Our use of force training begins at our academy, which is currently 22-week academy, and we have both a legal and block of instruction and a defensive tactics block of instruction and a firearms block of instruction that lasts for 22 weeks and are significant in volume and hours. And then throughout the academy, there are interwoven so that the legal and firearms and defensive tactics are woven into scenario-based training that occurs where we are actually placed in events conducting actual law enforcement activities on actors that we hire so that our instructors can observe both our working knowledge of the use of force and how we apply it. And then we are graded and judged based on our responses to make sure that our responses are appropriate under the circumstances and that we only use the level of force which is allowable both by law and by policy. And any agent that does not successfully complete what we call PAU, or the Practical Applications Unit part of the training, and does not demonstrate that they understand when and how to use force, and specifically deadly force, is not allowed to graduate and become a special agent. And then do you have training throughout your career? Yes, ma'am, we do. We are required to train quarterly on legal defensive tactics and firearms training, to receive updates on the law, to demonstrate continued proficiency with our weapon system, and to be evaluated and judged by instructors to make sure that going forward we're continuing to demonstrate an understanding of when and how to use any type of force that is allowable and justified. You indicated before that the investigation charged around in early February 2011. Can you describe to the jury what changed? The type of information we received significantly changed when Mr. Olson was prompted into the command staff and he started being invited to command staff meetings and being tasked as a command staff member and being made aware of plans to acquire grenades, specifically plans to inquire about other types of explosives, and being made aware of where the militia, or specifically Mr. Cox at least, maintain weapons and collections or caches, and specifically who brought up grenades. The very first time we ever heard of grenades was on November the 19th in December, when they were generically referring to the munitions they had in their 37 millimeter launchers as grenade or grenade launchers. The first time that hand-thrown grenades as explosive was ever brought up was when Mr. Cox brought it up on February the 4th, when he tasked Mr. Vernon and Mr. Olson to go get grenade bodies and fuses, and then explained to them that how they to take those and turn them into functional grenades. So it was Schaefer Cox who brought that up. Yes, it was. And what about C4? Who first brought C4 in this investigation? The first time that C4 was discussed was again in February 4th, and it was Schaefer Cox who brought it up when they were discussing grenades and explosives, and Schaefer Cox brought it up and said that he had a source or a friend who knew a friend. I believe what he said is he used to be in the United States Army and he could make them C4. About a week after that conversation is the meeting at Ken Thessing's house on February 12, 2011, and you were asked some questions about that meeting. That was the first time that you learned of Operation 241. Yes, ma'am, it was. And who brought that up? Schaefer Cox brought that up, and he characterized it as a discussion that he had been having with Ken Thessing, and he introduced it at the rest of the people who were present there, which would have been Mr. Barney and Mr. Olson, and described 241. And that was the first time that we had ever heard about it. So Schaefer Cox first brought that up. Yes, ma'am, he did. It wasn't J.R. Olson. No, ma'am, it was not. Who continued to bring it up throughout the meeting? Throughout the meeting, at least 3 or 4 different occasions, Mr. Cox brought it back up. And he was very intent on feeling out the rest of the members of the command staff and getting their feedback on what they thought of the plan, both from a moral position and from a position of whether or not it was something that he could actually be carried out. Were you expecting to hear that? No, I was expecting to learn of some type of response. Mr. Cox would have been he wasn't going to show up in court on February 14th, and when there was going to be a warrant, I expected there to be some type of response. I did not expect what I heard in the February 12th meeting. And did that concern you? It greatly concerned me. Throughout the course of the investigation, did you ever hear Schaefer Cox renounce Operation 241? No, ma'am, he never did. You were asked some questions about the clip in that February 12th meeting when Mr. Olson suggested 5-for-1. You talked to him after he suggested that? Yes, ma'am, I did. And after that, did Mr. Olson follow your directions? I believe he always followed my directions. I talked to him to clarify with him when he was in these types of intense conversations and there was this type of very serious planning was going on, that it would be easy for him to get caught up in the moment and to try to seem too interested, and that his role was to respond to my taskings and his role was to collect information, make recordings, and report it back to me. And after that, I believe that he kept the conversation in his mind and responded to that. What about Mr. Barney? During the course of the investigation, did you ever hear Mr. Barney renounce 241 plan? No, ma'am, he did not. And who first brought up killing women and children? The first time I heard any discussion of killing women and children was when Lonnie Vernon talked about that in February 2011. And what was the context for that? Mr. Vernon was describing to Mr. Fulton a plan of some type that he agreed on by the militia when they respond to the judges' homes and cops and homes around them and drag people out and kill them. That was the February the 4th, 5th weekend in Anchorage. Yes, ma'am. Was Schaefer Cox present during that? During the specific conversation, he was not. He had several telephonic conversations or appearances throughout that weekend, but during that conversation, he was not present. You said that hearing the information about Operation 241 caused you great concern. What about Schaefer Cox's comments about Ron Woods and Mark Guerrero dangling like wind chimes? Mr. Traverso, objection, Your Honor, reopening the direct. That was not on direct. You'll be given a chance to inquire further on cross. Lamoureux, that caused you concern? Yes, ma'am, that did. Between Schaefer Cox, Coleman Barney, and Mr. Olson regarding Operation 241, who was the first to suggest killing women and kids? Of those three individuals in the context of 241, nobody ever discussed killing women and children other than Mr. Cox. Mr. Barney and Mr. Olson said that it was not something that they could do, and Mr. Cox described circumstances under which potentially it could occur. You were asked some questions about Michael Anderson. What's your understanding of how many names were in that database? I believe from the interview that I've done that there were 30 to 40 names in the database, and I don't know whether that incorporates the names that we found on paper or not, so I would estimate between 30 and 40. Can you tell the jury what the IACC is? I think it's what it was. What it was. Yeah, it was the Interior Alaska Conservative Coalition, and it was a group of individuals who met with a certain political ideology, and I don't know exactly what they were trying to accomplish, but it was a political organization in nature, is my understanding. Can you somehow explain what that ideology was, or who are you able to? I think the name speaks for itself. In mid-February 2011, Schaefer Cox, Coleman Barney, and Mr. Olson went out to the property at Bradway Road and moved some items there. What's your understanding of weapons caches in this case? My understanding of weapons caches is that the very first time they reported back to us was January 31st, and we first learned of weapons caches after a conversation that Mr. Olson had with Mr. Vernon, so we began to attempt to determine if they existed and where they were at, and we also believe that along the way through the course of this investigation, there was at least one weapons cache that was mentioned by Mr. Cox in a recording that we never located and to this day have never found. Mr. Dooley asked you some questions about 8 grenades which were never found. Yes, ma'am. Do you know where they are? I don't. Ms. Hayden asked you some questions about Mr. Vernon's after February 19, 2011. Can you explain your understanding of the interaction with Mr. Vernon had with Mr. Barney and of Mr. Cox after February 19th? I know at least 3 occasions where they were communicating on February 26th when Mr. Olson goes out to Coleman Barney's house. He's told that they have found out from Lonnie that they're getting suppressors. And Mr. Olson says, actually, I was talking to Mr. Vernon. I'm the one who's getting those from Mr. Fulton. So I know that there was a conversation between them before Mr. Olson got there about suppressors on March 3rd. Mr. Vernon had a conversation with Mr. Barney while they were out at a restaurant in southern Cushman in Fairbanks, and then the Vernons were asked to go by Coleman Barney's house after the meeting. I don't know if they ever went, however. What do you mean they were asked? The Vernons told Mr. Olson that Coleman had asked him to stop by. And was Mr. Vernon aware of what the others would be purchasing on March 10th, 2011? Yes, ma'am, he was. What was his knowledge? Mr. Olson, oh yeah, Mr. Olson told Karen and Lonnie Vernon that he was going to meet with Coleman and Schaefer late in the day, and that there would be a suppressed pistol for Schaefer, and that there were 4 grenades and they could divide them up 2 and 2, and they could each get 2 grenades. What's your understanding of Mr. Vernon's, if he had any interactions with Michael Anderson after February 19th? The last interaction Mr. Vernon had with Mike Anderson was on February 17th, and I can't recall any interaction Mr. Vernon had with Mr. Anderson after that. And what was the context of that? On the 17th, affirmative. On the 17th, Lonnie and Karen Vernon tried to get up with Michael Anderson to get the list from him, and he could not give it to them. Miss Hayden asked you some questions about Mr. Vernon's civil case, but that wasn't the only thing occupying his time, was it? No, ma'am, it wasn't. When he met with Mr. Olson, what did he talk to Mr. Olson about after February 19th? They talked about a variety of things. Mr. Vernon expressed extreme agitation about the law enforcement. He expressed a desire to obtain weapons and potentially use them against law enforcement. And then they had a variety of conversations that I would consider to be non-criminal in nature. Did he specifically talk about using grenades against law enforcement? On March 3rd, 2011, he specifically talked about trading some of Karen Vernon's jewelry to obtain grenades, and then that he would be able to use those to kill several law enforcement officers at a time. What else did Mr. Vernon say about communication towers? That was on February 17th. Okay, go ahead. On February 17th, 2011, Mr. Vernon was talking about or planning some type of operational strategy involving confronting law enforcement and using different distraction techniques like fires, taking down communication towers, and taking out part of the electrical grid to delay or confuse the response to law enforcement, and then what action they could take when law enforcement responded. And between February 19th and March 10th, Mr. Vernon continued to meet with Mr. Olson. Yes, ma'am, he did. After Mr. Cox decided that or started talking about fleeing the state, is there any reason why Schaefer Cox couldn't have left the state? No, ma'am. He on February 12th started on the 12th. He discussed with a variety of people that he was aware of ways to leave the state and discussed a bunch of different options of how he could leave the state, and I guess theoretically how he could have done so at any time he chose. Were you aware of whether Mr. Cox had cash? I was aware on February 14th that he had cash, other valuables, and that he gave part of it to Mr. Olson. What about after the search of Coleman Barney's house? Did you learn that Schaefer Cox had cash? Yes, ma'am, we did. Do you remember approximately how much? Traversal, we're going way beyond the scope of direct and cross-examination, Your Honor. Traversal opened the door. No, I did not. The objections overruled, as I indicated. You'll be given opportunity for further cross if new matters are raised. I believe my recollection is that Mr. Cox had approximately $11,000 or $12,000 in cash in his personal belongings at Coleman Barney's house. You didn't have him under any sort of house arrest? No, ma'am. Mr. Traverso asked you a question about any criminal activity by Schaefer Cox between August 2010 and March 2011. And he also asked you whether the federal government had nothing to arrest him on prior to the March 10, 2011 purchase of those items from Mr. Olson. Did the federal government have anything to arrest him on prior to the purchase of illegal items from Mr. Olson? My personal assessment was that there was probable cause that could have been used to arrest Mr. Cox and Mr. Barney and Mr. Vernon for actions they had committed prior to them engaging in the purchase or attempted purchase of weapons. And you indicated you're familiar with these counts against the defendants in this case. Do you know, are there any substantive counts against these defendants for the items that they purchased from Mr. Olson or March 10, 2011, separate from the conspiracy count? No, that's not before this court. No, ma'am. There were some questions about the trailer. Were you aware prior to March 10th, 2011? Were you aware of the trailer prior to March 10th? Yes, ma'am, we were aware of it. Can you tell the jury what you knew about the trailer and what was in it and where it was? We knew that the trailer had been included in operational planning for KJMP as early as November 23rd. And then we knew that the trailer was at Mr. Barney's house and that Mr. Cox was putting his possessions into it. Mr. Olson had been taken out to the trailer by Mr. Cox and observed his possessions in it, and that the trailer was going to be used to transport Mr. Cox's possessions from Mr. Barney's house to the site where the trucker could inspect the load to see if he had enough room to take that stuff with him. And that trailer was searched by law enforcement? Yes, ma'am, it was. Regarding the Sten machine gun that was found in the trailer, was that item sold to any of the defendants by a confidential human source? In this case, no, ma'am, it wasn't. What about the silencer that was found in the trailer? Was that sold to any of the defendants by a human source? In this case, no, ma'am. What about the grenade bodies and the fuses and the smokeless powder and the JB weld? Were any of those items sold to the defendants by the human source? In this case, no, ma'am. What about the 37mm launchers and the Hornet's Nest rounds that were found in the trailer? Were any of those items sold or given to the defendants, in this case, by a human source? No, ma'am. Ms. Lamoureux, no other questions for the witnesses at this time? The court, yeah. Traversal, thank you, Your Honor. Recross examination. Traversal, on redirect, you stated that Mr. Cox had not renunciated 241. My belief is that Mr. Cox did not feel it was sustainable, but I never heard him say that it wasn't morally allowable. Did you or were you aware of Mr. Olson asking about 241 in the event that Mr. Cox was arrested? Let me read that again. Did you or were you aware of Mr. Olson asking about 241 in the event Mr. Cox was arrested? Yes, sir, I told him to do that. And Mr. Cox explained that it was a fruitless gesture. Does that mean that the plan was renunciated? No, sir. My understanding of that conversation was that there was too few people, and that it would be a fruitless, and that the response would be quickly squashed. He used the words fruitless gesture, correct? I'm not disagreeing with you. I don't specifically remember that, sir. Thank you. 30 to 40 names on a database. Did you give that information to the U.S. Attorney? That information came from an interview with Mr. Anderson. Did you give that information to the U.S. Attorney's Office? My recollection is that they were present when that information was given. This is the first I've heard about it, and I've not received any information about 30 to 40 names. Did Mr. Anderson give you 30 to 40 names? No, sir. I'm not saying that he gave 30 to 40 names. I'm saying that my recollection is he estimated there was 30 to 40 names. He estimated it 30 to 40, yes, sir. Yeah, and it also came to your attention later that Mr. Anderson had lied in part in his interview with Special Agent Klein and Investigator Peyton Meredith, correct? Yes, sir, it did. Okay, and also that Mr. Anderson had, well, never mind, traversal. That's it. No further questions, Your Honor. The court, Mr. Dooley, no questions. Miss Hayden, just a couple of quick questions. Miss Hayden, you were present here in the courtroom when Mr. Anderson testified, correct? Yes, ma'am, I was. And isn't it true that Mr. Anderson said that he never had any contact with Lonnie Vernon concerning the list? I believe that's correct, yes, ma'am. That's all I have, thank you. No other questions, thank you. All right, thank you, Agent Sutherland. You may step down. That's the end of Sutherland. Hey, Sutherland, I think you're an absolute piece of crap. I think you're the anti-American, and when I pray my imprecatory prayers, I'm going to include your name as top of the list for all the deception, the fact that you invaded their privacy. They were having private conversations. You set them up with false weapons charges. You sent in multiple criminal government informants, drug runners for the Hells Angels, and you frame them. I consider you an absolute piece of scum, a piece of human garbage. Your life is absolute, the worst kind of piece of human garbage that I can think of. And that's what I think about you.